Dr. Trampy.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Father, we thank you for this community and for so many people who want to serve the community to the best of their abilities. We pray that you be with us this evening and guide us as we do your work. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Supervisors. First item is the approval of your agenda, and I'd note that there are 3 bullpen items for addition to the consent agenda. One is for the Soapbox Derby, a budget amendment and appropriation to apply $15,000 from the Tourism Reserve Funds to facilitate the Soapbox Derby's relocation to Dominion Raceway here in Spotsylvania. Second is the approval of a resolution for support for FredEx funding for the Exit 126 Super Ramp and Harrison Road bridge work. And third is the appointment of Mr. Greg Newhouse, the Planning Commission Chair, to the Transportation Committee for a term that expires February 13 of 2019. In addition, County Attorney has mentioned that the board might find it convenient and a means of avoiding, again, having to suspend the bylaws if the board were to take up Item 1 under presentations by staff. That's the item addressing the board bylaws regarding information required of public speakers. That might be considered prior to public presentations and immediately following this vote to approve the agenda.
All right. I guess first we do need to do a suspend the bylaws for electronic voting. We're going to do voice today.
Very good.
So, all those in support of the, I guess, well, I need a motion, I believe, don't I, for the suspension?
Motion to suspend.
All right, I'll do voice. Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
God, Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
Chair's aye. And then,
Mr. Chair?
yes.
I'll make a motion that we put in the number 2 and number 3, and I also make a motion that we would keep the number 1 item to the presentation. That's what the county administrator recommended there, as far as Soapbox Derby was going to be a presentation?
No, sir, excuse me. The 3 items in the bullpen would be added to consent: the Soapbox Derby item, the FredEx funding resolution, and the Greg Newhouse appointment. And then the item to be brought up forward from presentations below is the county attorney's item regarding information required of public speakers.
I'll make a motion to move on what was...
So moved.
So moved.
Amy, you got all that? All right, voice vote. Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
And chair's aye. Carl, I believe that's you.
Amy, may I have the floor computer very briefly? While that's being brought up, Mr. Chair, members of the board, this is simply the change to the board's bylaws with respect to information required of public speakers. As you recall, there was a desire that the board require either the speaker's address or their voting district. So this is that change, essentially bringing forward to you. As it's a change to the bylaws, the requirement is that 5 votes are needed for the amendment. So this should be pulled up here in just a second. No, this isn't it. Bear with us just one more moment, please. There we go. All right, so the first, second slide, please. This is the change to section 4.1E5. Again, this simply changes the requirement to either his or her address or his or her election district. If you can go to the next slide, please. And this is the change for the public hearings, again, making the same change. So with that, I would present it to the board for any discussion and for a vote to adopt.
Any discussion? Mr. Ross?
Motion to approve.
Have a motion to approve by Mr. Ross. Mr. Marshall, did you have anything? All right, do voice vote. Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Dr. Trampy.
Aye.
Chair's aye.
Thank you.
Good, that brings us to public presentations. Amy, has anyone signed up?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to run through the guidelines, Mr. Chairman, but I realize I don't have them with me. Michelle is bringing me a copy, and we'll do that in just a moment.
Get him.
Sons. Mr. Chairman, we are sans guidelines for public presentations. Generally speaking, public presentations are not public hearings. If you signed up for a public hearing, that sign-up is separate. Public presentations are one-way communication from citizens to the Board of Supervisors on items that you feel are important to the board to hear about. This is not a forum for a dialogue or debate, nor is it a forum for political advertisements, business advertisements, or community information. This is to address the Board of Supervisors. When your name is called, please come to the podium. If you're speaking individually, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. If you're speaking on behalf of a group, you'll be given 5 minutes. A yellow light comes on when you have 30 seconds left to sum up. When the red light comes on, you are expected to stop, and the microphone will be turned off. Amy, who is first signed up?
Tamara Quick.
Good afternoon. I want to thank you for allowing me a time to speak. My name is Tamara Quick. I am in the Livingston District. I am a parent. I'm a taxpayer. I'm a voter. I'm not a teacher, but I'm here to support the schools and the children of the county. I just would like to ask this board to please support Dr. Baker's proposal for funding for next year for the schools. It's my understanding the honorable majority of the school board voted to support his funding, and I would like to ask that you also do that. Our teachers deserve pay raises, and our students deserve your support and further support from the county. I believe Dr. Baker's proposal does not go nearly far enough to show the support that the students need and that the school needs, and that you should work a lot harder to bring us up to the state average. My understanding is we're the 13th largest school district, but we are the 80th in per pupil spending. To me, that's very shameful. When there's surplus funds, there's funds in the general fund, and the people would like the opportunity to vote to make sure that schools are fully funded and fully supported. Personally, I have 4 students eligible to be in the school system. One is being homeschooled because the schools could not provide for her needs. Another one has just been diagnosed with dyslexia. As you know, there are many more special education students now than there have been, and that number is going to increase. There are many students with dyslexia not being identified, so my hope is you'll go above and beyond Dr. Baker's budget and support increased funding to identify and serve students with dyslexia. Currently, my son and others' civil rights have been and are being violated, and I believe this is a serious matter that many on the state and federal level need to know about. And I believe when there's surplus funds sitting there not being spent while my son's rights are being violated is shameful. And my hope is that you all will think about that. I lose sleep at night over the damage that's been done to my son and of all the other children not being identified. Teachers need support so they know how to work with special needs kids. There needs to be better programs in place for all children, but especially for those with special needs. Again, I ask that you please support Dr. Baker's budget and work to increase funding so that our students at least get the per pupil spend at the statewide average. Thank you.
There are no other citizens signed up to speak.
Is there anybody that did not sign up that wishes to speak at this time? All right, close. Go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Carla Jordan. I'm in the Chancellor District. What I am here to speak about today deals with kind of an article that was recently in the Freelance Star and also an email I received from the board members that I'd like to talk about. So whether anyone likes or dislikes, agrees or disagrees with the idea of municipal water fluoridation is a moot point. The real issue involves local governments determining that all citizens should be subjected to forcible medication regardless of whether residents want to ingest it or not. Local municipalities have been adding fluoride to public drinking water for decades. Who really wants the government to decide for them which medicines they should be forced to take? If this, then what next? Civil liberty is defined as, quote, individual rights protected by law from unjust governmental or other influence. The Ninth Amendment reads, again, quote, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So in other words, we, the people, have fundamental natural rights with which the government cannot interfere. Mandatory water fluoridation is interfering with health and denying all citizens their basic constitutional rights. In a recent email, board members explained to me that it only costs $27,000 per year for Spotsylvania County to add fluoride to the water. It also only costs $10 per child per year without insurance to receive a fluoride treatment from a dentist. The county could pay for 2,700 children every year in this county to receive the treatment and discontinue adding fluoride to the public water supply. Also in that email, board members explained to me that Spotsylvania County has been adding fluoride to the public water supply since 1981. Just because something has been happening for more than 30 years does not mean that it should continue. For instance, the Tuskegee experiment continued for 40 years, but someone finally had the sense to determine that it was unethical and illegal and put a stop to it. Where is our sense of progress and free thought? Don't drink the Kool-Aid. It's made with fluoridated water.
Is there anybody else that did not sign up that wishes to? Ms. Knapper?
Good evening, gentlemen. I'm speaking on behalf of the Spotsylvania Education Association and in favor of Dr. Baker's budget. You guys have been fabulous stewards of our money. You've done a great job. We've had a $12 million surplus this year, $7 million surplus last year.
Ma'am, your name is?
Oh, Dawn Napper. Sorry.
Thank
It's
you.
been a long day. Sorry about that. But you guys have done really, really well. You've come up with $7 million last year, $12 million this year. You've done well by your own employees. You set aside $1.3 million for your Evergreen study, which was fantastic. The schools are 3 times that size. So they really need $3.9 million in order to start implementing their Evergreen study. So I really hope that you are able to find the funds to implement the Evergreen study on the school side. 79% of the school employees, all the school employees, are below the midpoint. So I really hope that you treat the school employees, who are also county employees, the same as you did the other county employees. Thank you.
Is there anybody else that did not sign up that wishes to speak at this time? We'll close public presentations.
Brings us to the consent agenda, Mr. Chairman. If I could have the floor computer, please. Consent agenda is as follows. Number 1 is approval of the board meeting minutes for January 9, 2018 meeting. Second is agreement with Rappahannock Area Agency on Aging for use of the Marshall Center. This is an annual renewal. Third is appointment of Benjamin Gerhardt to the Parks and Recreation Commission for a term that expires 12/31 of 19. He'll be representing the Chancellor District. Fourth is the approval of 4 contracts with multiple firms to provide GIS support services for us. Item 5 is approval of an amendment to a betterment agreement. This is for water and sewer facilities to be installed in the county. Agreement involves the county, VDOT, and Shirley Contracting Company. That's a firm doing work at 606 down at Thornburg. This is $163,127.23 of $250,000 that is approved in the budget, but the amendment requires board approval. Item 6 is approval of a contract with Ferguson Enterprises for advanced metering infrastructure network. These are replacement water meters for our system. They're at the end of their service life and require replacement. The contract's $10,279,470, and of course, this is utility fund money. Item 7 is approval of a contract to Colossal Contractors to provide painting services for a term limit of 3 years and not to exceed $100,000 per project. Item 8 is to approve a purchase order to Enforcement Video LLC. This is for Vista high definition body cameras, $113,600 of funding to come from the Sheriff's Asset Forfeiture Funds. Item 9 is the use of the Sheriff's Asset Forfeiture Funds for purchase of body cameras and related software and equipment, an appropriation of $113,000, that should be $600, of course. Item 10 is the approval of purchase order to Physio Control, Inc. for 8 life packs for $254,704.88. Item 11 is the approval of a purchase order to Atlantic Emergency Solutions for a 2018 Pierce Velocity platform and enforcer rescue pumper for the amounts indicated. Item 12 is the approval of a resolution for issuance of debt refinancing. This is for the Virginia Railway Express. Item 13 is authorization of a public hearing to amend ordinance relating to the first responders tax exemption. Item 14 is a budget adjustment and appropriation of $10,000 to sponsor Fishing University that will be filming on Lake Anna in 2018 for a program to air in 2019. Item 15 is a budget adjustment and appropriation of insurance funds stemming from a fire and rescue vehicle insurance claim. It's in the amount of $2,475. Item 16 is a collection of capital projects, budget amendments to reconcile project actuals with the approved budget. Item 17 is a grant application, approval of grant application request for the FY18 Highway Safety Grant Program Selective Enforcement for Speed. So have a local match of $50,145. Item 18 is a grant application request for the Highway Safety Grant Program Selective Enforcement for Alcohol for $48,950. And again, these are the grant applications. Item 19 is a grant application request for the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services for the Burn Justice Assistance Grant for equipment for $32,892. Item 20 are revisions to the Citizen Budget Review Committee bylaws. Item 21 is the use of fund balance to approval of the use of fund balance to increase the FY18 contribution to the Spotsylvania Historical Association to cover an amount unpaid in 2017. And then finally, the three bullpen items, the soapbox derby, budget amendment and appropriation to apply $15,000 from tourism reserve funds to facilitate the soapbox derby's relocation to Dominion Raceway, the approval of a resolution of support for FredEx funding for Exit 126, the super ramp, and the Harrison Road Bridge widening project. And finally, the appointment of Greg Newhouse, the Planning Commission Chairman, to the Transportation Committee for a term that expires February 13 of 2019. And those are your consent agenda.
Does any board member wish to have any of these removed?
I like pull three of them. Number 1, number 16, and number 20. One is going to be just for some brief. I found some mistakes in our approval of the minutes there that we'd like to have corrected on some of our committees.
Okay. Anybody else? Mr. Yakubowski?
The soapbox derby, please.
I think it's,
It was.
call that one 22.
Okay.
Anybody else? All right, can we get a motion to approve all except for 1, 16, 20, and 22? Mr. Ross?
So moved.
All right. Motion to approve the agenda except for 1, 16, 20, and 22 by Mr. Ross. Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
Chair's aye. All right. Start at number 1.
I've got 3 things on number 1 there, just some corrections that we need to make to those minutes. The FAMPO committee, I believe that's on page 3 of the minutes. It's listed as being David Ross, Tim McLaughlin, and Gary Skinner as primary, Paul Trampy, Mark Taylor as alternates. Mr. Skinner was removed, is not on that committee myself. I need to be added to the FAMPO committee there. Mr. Skinner removed. Also on the Public Safety Committee, it lists myself and Greg Sabula as the members of that committee. Mr. Sabula is no longer on the board. It's Mr. Greg Benton that needs to be added there. And that's also on page 3. And on page 3 also, the Minority Affairs Committee, I just need my last name added. It says Kevin and Gary Skinner. Needs to be Kevin Marshall and Gary Skinner. We can make those 3 changes.
Amy, did you get those? All right, number 16.
We can vote too.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead and vote.
Well, 16 is the, I had some questions. It was $439,000, I do believe, in that adjustment that is being,
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Mr. Skinner.
do we need to vote on these individually as we correct them?
Is it individually, bulk? Can we do a bulk vote?
You can, but if there's disagreement on one of them, my recommendation is usually to take up each one individually. But
All right.
if you want to do it as bulk, you require some foresight, but
All right.
clairvoyance.
You want to make a
I'll
motion?
make a motion, we accept the changes to the number 1 on the consent agenda.
All right. Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Dr. Trampy.
Aye.
Chair's aye. All right, now number 16.
It's number 16, it's, I believe it's $439,000. It's the money that was not used during the Massaponax Church Road improvements. It listed that it's been moved to the project at Thornsburg. I'd like to know what part, is that basically almost $500,000? What is that going to at the project at Thornsburg? If anyone can provide that information?
Mr. Taylor? Or, go ahead.
Ms. Jewell?
Good evening. We have applied for revenue sharing a number of times on the 118 project and have been awarded it a number of times. And that project is $22 million in total. The county doesn't have that full share of the cost, but has a considerable amount of the cost based on the prior revenue sharing awards. The county has in place an agreement with VDOT, and it specifies over what time periods we will pay our share of the project. And you're going to see in the recommended budget that that budget reflects those payment terms, those years of payment. For fiscal year 19, we do have a payment to VDOT coming due on that overall $22 million project. This $441,000 that's available from Massaponax allows us to borrow $442,000 less in fiscal year 19 to make that payment. That's why we are suggesting that this savings on Massaponax Church Road go towards that project so we don't have to borrow more money for that. Actually, I should be clear, so we borrow less money than we otherwise would have to borrow.
I understand. That's all I
Okay.
wanted was clarification on where that was going.
Yes.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Skinner?
Hey, Bonnie, one quick question. So with the agreement we have with VDOT, as far as 22 million, if there are changes that might be made from this point on until that is completion, can we do that? I mean, meaning that we're revenue sharing, but if we wanted to change just for the heck of it, make the northbound entrance coming from the racetrack, okay? Could we, and hook it into the current traffic pattern, and that might cost us more money. Can we still do something like that in our plans for the future?
I think in terms of the plan itself, that's a VDOT question. In terms of the funding, we would have to plan for that into the future.
Okay.
I can clarify what Mr. Skinner's talking about. He's talking about the proposed, and Sean, you'll be able to help me, the proposal of taking the current northbound ramp and tying it into the new northbound ramp at the Thornburg interchange.
Yeah, that is a design build project, which we are working with the design builder on. I don't think there would be any opportunity to make that necessarily happen right now. We're in negotiations with them, and it's an active negotiation. So anything that we're doing on this project is going to be within the current budget we have.
But if we came up with the additional money,
I think it would probably be a discussion that you all would be having with us and the design builder if it was something you wanted added.
okay. That's what we needed to know. Thank you.
Bonnie, one more question. What will we have to take out a loan for? How much? Do you know? I knew that.
For this project in fiscal year 19, the amount that we will need to borrow, exclusive of the $442,000 from Massaponax Church Road, is $3.3 million.
Yes.
In subsequent years, we will need to borrow $9.5 million more to complete our, the funding that we've committed to.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Marshall, you have a motion on?
Motion to approve 16 of the consent agenda.
All right, motion to approve 16 by Mr. Marshall. Mr. Yakubowski. Aye. Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Dr. Trampy.
Aye.
And the chair's aye. Well, the 20. This was the revisions to the CBRC.
Yeah, I have several questions for some input and discussion from the other board members. I don't feel that this revision is needed to do to one committee and not to do it to all committees. I'm not in favor of doing this. We had this discussion back in January. I gave my opinion on it then. I think that, if a board member makes an appointment of anyone to any committee, if that person is not doing the county justice by serving properly with that committee and acting appropriately, that board member should have the power to remove them. I don't think it should be brought to a vote. I think it was something that should be handled by that individual board member and that member of that committee.
Any discussion?
Mr. Otero.
Mr. Skinner?
The only thing we don't want to do is, we don't want to appoint somebody to a committee and then be pressured if there's a difference of opinion between the board member who's appointing that and the committee member. And I think this prevents that. I mean, I don't appoint people just because they always agree with what I do. I appoint people because they've got some good viewpoints and they know what's happening. And that's what I don't want to have is, I guess many years ago when school board members were appointed, okay, it was, better follow the supervisor's lead or I'm not going to get appointed anymore. I think the whole purpose of this is have a committee that's open and free to discuss it without either any repercussions from the board member who did it. I mean, that's what I look for. So I don't want to be in that position.
Okay. Mr. Ross?
Carl, why is it just the Citizens Budget Review Committee that this change has been made for and not all committees? Because it takes a majority to approve.
My understanding is that this was desired to actually, opposite of what Mr. Marshall was referencing, to bring the CBRC in line with the other committees. The other committees don't have something like this or are silent, and it would be the case that any appointee that is made by the board can also be removed by the board. So this was to bring the CBRC consistent with that to ensure that the board, if it appoints somebody, can also remove them. That is the clarification that's proposed here.
So presently, on all our other committees, this is the case, where a majority of the board can remove an appointee?
I just confirmed with Susan, who's been working on the bylaws with all the committees, that it is consistent with the rest of the committees that, that the board, if the board can make the appointment, the board can also remove that appointee. I don't have them all in front of me. We haven't double-checked that in the last couple minutes, but she's been working with them, and that's what she reports is that would be consistent across the committees, that the board who appoints can also remove. Here, that was different. This language reads as though the board would be limited and can only be terminated by the appointing supervisor or by the resignation. So this clears it up to make it consistent.
Okay. Well, with that said, I support this because it brings CBRC in line with the other committees.
I have floor, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking for consistency through all of them. When I read through this and it's labeling one committee, that's all I'm looking for, is I'd like for it to be consistent throughout. If this is the way we're doing every committee, it's everybody on the same playing field. That's all I'm looking for.
That's my understanding. It will make it consistent.
Any other comments? Mr. Marshall, may want to make a motion on it?
I'll make a motion that we accept 20.
All right, motion by Mr. Marshall to accept 20. Mr. Yakubowski? Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
No.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
Chair's aye. All right, 22, which is the soapbox derby.
Yes, thank you. If it is in here, my apologies, but I did not see. If we are going to be expending taxpayer dollars, though it is from a fund that does need to go to tourism, I would highly suggest that the name is changed from the Fredericksburg Soapbox Derby to the Spotsylvania one. I didn't see that listed, but I would.
That would be high on my list, Mr. Yakubowski.
Okay.
And
I just
Debbie
want to make
Eller
sure before we vote on it.
Yes,
caught the speeding car
yes, if
of
we were-
opportunity,
If we were
please.
to change it, it would be to the Spotsylvania.
That was it. I just, okay.
And these are funds from the Tourism Reserve Fund, which is drawn from the transient occupancy tax and must be used for tourism only.
Right, so, okay. I just want to make sure that we, if we're giving money, that we get something out of it too. I would make a motion unless there's anything else. Motion to accept.
Good catch, Mr. Yakubowski. Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
Chair, aye.
Brings us to board reports, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I'll keep on down this since I've been on the right-hand side here. Mr. Yakubowski?
Thank you. Two things that I do have. One, I would really like to ask staff, if the board is okay with it, to please come up with a voting system. I think it's beyond time that we come up with something. We can expend those funds, and hopefully in this new budget we're going to see in just a little bit, there's already money in there. So if there is, disregard what I'm saying. If not, please, I would think that we could expend a little bit of money and make our meetings go a little bit quicker. And then I have the other question that I have for staff is, tonight we'll be seeing the county administrator's budget. Thursday we will be meeting with the school board to get the school board proposed budget. And then we vote on the advertised tax rate next week. That's a rather quick turnaround. I look back at the past 5 years, and it does seem to be unusual to do it that quick. I know that these dates run, or there's reasons behind the dates, behind the public hearing and so forth. And so my question for staff, is there any way to change it? And if not, can we please make sure that we don't do it this quickly again, because I don't think that it does us well to have it that quick.
I'll take that issue under advisement and bring back recommendations for next year's budget calendar. Ms.
But
Jakubowski,
this budget calendar is set. We can't,
Right,
we have no room to move it whatsoever.
very little relative to the reassessment, et cetera. Thoughts, Bonnie?
Yes, please. This year is a little bit sooner in terms of the tax rate add decision than last year, but it is consistent with the prior year, and that is because the prior year was also a reassessment year. Whenever there's a reassessment year, we have a longer period of time over which we need to advertise the tax rate, the equalized rate and the tax rate. And so for the last 2 reassessment cycles, we have tried to avoid in our budget calendar any meetings occurring during spring break. And to accommodate that, in conjunction with accommodating the mandated advertisement requirements during a reassessment year, that is what is causing that those dates to be so quick, back to back. And so we did try our best to extend that, but we're not able to meet all those targets and still have our advertisement in place if we were to extend that date any.
Now, with all of that said, there is the possibility in some years of starting earlier. And I say some years because depending on where the state is in their biennial budget cycle, we are in a state of relatively less mystery or relatively more mystery about what the state's contribution to the schools might be or what their intentions for programs generally might be. So there may be possibilities working with the schools and the staff otherwise to start earlier, but typically that early work is fairly speculative because the state budget is uncertain. So that's a kind of constraint on the front end. We did start earlier this year, and you'll see more of this in the proposed budget, with soliciting input from the board about your priorities and objectives for the budget. And one thing that I think does help the schedule compression is that we've tried to use those inputs very well in putting together a recommended budget that reflects the priorities that the board identified back in October at the pre-budget public hearing.
No, and I appreciate the explanation. I've gotten questions from people who were wondering why it was so quick, and so I thank you for laying that out, and I would just like to say to the rest of the board that when it does come to the advertised rate, to advertise as high as we can, because it can always go lower, and especially with such a quick turnaround, I think that that would definitely be helpful. So thank you.
Nothing to report.
Mr. Ross?
I'd just like to thank the principals, the school board. I saw Dr. Baker out here earlier. Looking forward to working together with you on the budget and taking care of our kids. That's all I've got.
Mr. Skinner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 2 items. One thing that was brought up this last meeting, we had the Transportation Committee. In our bylaws that we passed the other meeting, there's a question I brought up because we're supposed to have 2 to 3 board members in the, would you go ahead and pass these down, please? Thank you, sir, right there. We're supposed to have 2 to 3 board members from the Board of Supervisors on it. And in there, it also allowed a board member to go ahead and represent its district. And I don't think that is what was intended, so I'm trying to correct it. The committee we're on is really made up of people. We did decide on 2 to 3 board members. We're there as a resource, I believe, to be that way. It also allows one of us to be the chairman, and I don't think that is correct because we want outside information. We want people, our constituents, to run these committees to help us. We'll be their resource, but then if we turn it into, as a chairman, we turn it into the running the committee, I don't see that we're servicing it properly. So what you have in front of you, and I'm not making what I'd like to do is put this on the agenda for next meeting. that we could go ahead and vote to make some changes. As you can see, is that number one, we will only have 2 to 3 supervisors on the Board of Transportation, or the Transportation Committee, and no other board member can serve as a representative from his district. That's, I think, going around the edge of what was really intended there. And the other thing is, I don't think a chairman should be on a committee. As I said, no supervisor should be the chairman of that committee. Because it is a recommendation from us, and I feel that we're on those committees just to be a resource to help out. So I ask you all to look at it, and I'm going to make a motion that this be put on the agenda for our next meeting in February, the second meeting in February.
I don't think we need a motion for it. I
Okay,
think we can
if
give
we
you.
don't need a motion, without objection, I'll
Yeah, Mr.
say, without objection, I'd like it put on the agenda. Thank you.
Mr. Taylor, you,
Yes, sir.
and if you could you get staff, I know this is more work, but go ahead and look at the committees and see if anybody else, I know I have appointed myself to the Transportation Committee. I also have appointed myself to the Lake Anna Advisory Committee, LAC. So there's 2 that I've appointed myself to, but I don't know about everybody else.
Mr. Chair. may
Mr. Skinner?
One last thing. I do want to explain this. It looks like the Board of Supervisors is crossed out, but my understanding is that was the BOS, as it's referred to in other things. So that's when I asked the county attorney to help me out with this. I just want to make sure everybody understands why it looks like it's crossed out, but it really does mean Board Supervisor. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
And my second one is, we've spent an awful lot of time on fluoride, and we've seen arguments on both sides, but the majority of the sides actually wanted to that leave the fluoride in the water. We have a budget in front of us. As we've seen, we can't do a referendum, even asking people to look at the water bills and then putting a question in there. I don't think that's a reliable survey. I've had an awful lot of constituents call me and tell me, basically, why are you wasting your time on this? It's been here for a long time. We've seen a lot of people come from out of the state to give us information, which I think were from experts. And so what I'd like to do is I would like to make a motion that we terminate any more meetings on the fluoride and just keep the fluoride in the water as it is. And if they want to do it in the future, that's fine. But again, we've spent an awful lot of time, and I would like to vote on just keeping it the way it is right now and terminate any more discussion on it.
All right, we have a motion on the floor from Mr. Skinner to keep fluoride as is in our water system. Mr. Ross?
Carl, can we even do that? To not to make a motion that the board cannot talk about a subject of any kind in the future?
It can certainly represent, I think, a desire by the board that it not be discussed or brought up. I'm hesitant to rule now that an individual board member could not bring that up in a board meeting, but I think the desire is, on behalf of Mr. Skinner, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Skinner, is to simply have the board make take a stand on the issue, so to head off any, I guess, discussions or presentations in the future to give some certainty to the matter. But I'd be hesitant to say that a board member could not bring that up in the future. But it can certainly represent a stance.
It appears that that's the motion.
I will withdraw that motion and make it correctly, David. You caught me again. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So my motion is to go ahead and decide tonight whether or not we keep fluoride in the water system or take it out. And that's all it is. I've never intended whatsoever to keep any board member from bringing it up in the future if you'd like to.
Mr. Ross?
Well, I'll ask again, do we need a motion on something that's already happening? I mean, there's been no decision by this board to take water out. Why would we? The water's already there with the fluorides in there. We had a very good point brought up even tonight. I know there's both sides of this, but is there a decision even needed to leave things as they are? And what value does that hold as we walk down the future, as far as if we're not going to bring it up again or changing it in the future? It really doesn't do anything, does it, Carl?
I certainly I have no problem with Mr. Skinner's motion to ask the board to take a stance on something by way of a vote. Obviously, any inaction of the board leaves things the way they are. So if the board did nothing, it would, essentially things would remain the same. That is correct. But I certainly don't have a problem with Mr. Skinner's motion presented to the board for the board to take a position on something. I don't have a legal problem with that.
Mr. Ross?
Well, I'll just throw out, I mean, we just had a citizen talk tonight, and I know that this board probably did spend a lot of time on the fluoride issue, and both sides were presented, but I'll say the group of people that came from out of state were mostly with fluoride lobby. I talked to the gentleman, Dr. Johnson, whose trip was paid for by the American Fluoride Association, So I would hate that we would make a decision based off of the lobby paying for people to come from out of state to talk with us. I think we're still talking about doing surveys with the water bill, just to find out what people are talking, and we're also talking about putting a notification in the water bill that's to let people know that their water is treated with fluoride, which I think are reasonable due to the fact that many people might not know that, and it is, in a way, forcing something that's not really necessary, and that there are both sides of the thing that say that even non-fluoridated countries have the same cavity rates decline that the fluoridated countries have. So I think that's still debatable. I don't know why we would want to close debate on that. I'm not saying I'm going to bring it up again, but as we left it, we were still considering changes to just notify our residents and citizens that we fluoridate our water because there's nothing there. And I understand that it's not monitored by the FDA like our toothpaste is. So you need a toothpaste warning that shows, you call poison control if you drink or eat your toothpaste. But we're not required to because our water's not covered by the FDA. But I know that's the legal answer, but I don't think it's the right answer. So I can't support your motion.
Anybody else?
Mr. Chair,
So,
I kind of agree with Mr. Ross to the point where we don't really need to do anything. I don't think the board has the intent to take fluoride out right now, and I don't know that anybody intends to make a motion to remove fluoride. But one of the things that Mr. Ross has brought up a number of times is about putting information in our water bills. I mean, I think that's nothing more than putting a paragraph on our water bill. Mr. Petrovich, is that? Can we put notices or various things in the water bills?
We could do a bill stuffer. We're also working on language to put on the water bill itself. Roughly, I don't have the exact language, but in effect, it would say that the Spotsylvania water is fluoridated to 0.7 milligrams per liter, and if you have questions about consuming fluoridated water, consult your healthcare professional.
So I think part of it, you're never going to make everybody happy here because a lot of the people want fluoride and some folks don't want fluoride. But, I mean, with a quick search, I mean, there are a number of filters that'll take the fluoride out of your water. I mean, that's something potentially we could stuff in the bill as well. Here are various types of filters that you could use. If you don't want the filter, you can filter it yourself. Vice taking it out for everybody. So they're fairly inexpensive, I think.
There are filters on the market that do remove fluoride. However, as a utilities department or a county, I don't think that we should, recommend any particular
Not a
filter
brand, but a style.
Or brand,
right.
but a style.
This type of filter removes fluoride.
And we can also put some information on fluoridated water in our next consumer confidence report that comes out either in May or June.
Okay. Thanks.
anybody else? Mr. Yakubowski.
Thank you. I think that this discussion shows why we need a vote, is because there is uncertainty, and I do think that we need to make a stand. We've heard both sides, and to have this sort of linger out there, having a question in the water bill about and explaining that there's 0.7 per liter, my question would be, what's a liter? I use a gallon. I don't even know what the conversion of that is. So if we want to be more confusing, if we want to throw out more facts, and I do take a bit of offense that big fluoride is persuading me to vote one way or the other. I've looked at the facts, and I've seen that the overwhelming majority show that there is no harmful effects for fluoride. I do think that we need to be vigilant for anything that comes up and any changes, because for years, asbestos was fine, lead paint was fine, but during those times, there were no studies that said that it wasn't and they were being held back. It was when the studies came out and they figured out that there was something harmful. So for us to make the assumption that there is something harmful based on outlying studies that have not been backed up with other studies, I think is premature. But I do think that at this point in time, we do need to make a vote and just say enough is enough. I've heard from several business people in our community who are stunned that we have spent so much time and effort. And here we are spending even more time and effort on an issue that I think that we really just need to make a stand. And if the time comes that we do need to take it out because there is substantial and credible information, at that point we take action. But until that point, let's move on to our budget and transportation and everything else that we need to deal with. So I'll fully support your motion, Mr. Skinner.
Mr. Marshall?
If Mr. Petrovich, the cost of adding the language onto the water bill, do you have any idea what that would be, or is it?
Mr. Loveday's in the audience, and I believe that we've gotten some preliminary cost estimates to put some language on the back of the bills.
Yeah, good evening. We got some initial cost estimates for placing a note on the back of the bill, and it's pretty marginal. I think it's about $50 to change the back of the bill, and actually we had a scheduled back of billing update here in the next couple of months. So to put a note on the back of the bill itself is pretty minimal cost. It's just working out that exact language that we want to have placed on that bill.
The bill template, though, would be a more permanent type
yeah, if we did a
notification
bill,
on the back of the bill.
yeah, correct. If we do a bill template, that means basically until we order that to be changed and direct the billing company to change it, it will always be on there.
Thank you, Mr. Loveday. Okay. Any other questions, Mr. Moore? All right, I'll just leave it with this. Y'all didn't know this, but I just sent an email to Mr. Taylor today. I've been a little under the weather, but I'd asked that this be brought back up here. I don't think I gave a date, but in the very near future, so we go get a decision on this. But I guess it's going to be tonight. My biggest concern is here we are, government again, and we're going to dictate to our citizens what they're going to ingest in to their bodies. I would not support this motion. And again, my biggest thing was to leave it to our citizens to give us the feedback that we need to make these decisions. You know, just because 99.9% of our population is fine with fluoride in their systems, how about being that 1% that isn't? How about picturing your child that isn't? Then it's going to be a little different when it's directly affecting you. Anyway, we have a motion on the floor from Mr. Skinner to keep fluoridation in the water as is. Is that correct, Mr. Skinner?
Yes, that is the motion.
Voice roll. Mr. Yakubowski. Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Nay.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Dr. Trappy.
No.
And chair is nay. We're keeping fluoride. All right, I forgot where it was. Mr. Marshall, board report.
Nothing to report.
Dr. Trampy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On February 1st, I attended a meeting held by, a community meeting sponsored by the Fredericksburg City chapter of the NAACP concerning flyers from the Klan, which have appeared everywhere from Loudoun, Stafford, Fredericksburg, here in Spotsylvania, I'm not sure where else. At that meeting, among a number of topics that were covered, the chief of police of Fredericksburg suggested that one of the reasons that things got so out of hand in Charlottesville is that their police department was not prepared for a large protest, which is kind of surprising in a university city. And that police chief from Fredericksburg gave an extensive presentation on how they're prepared in Fredericksburg. And so I would like to invite our sheriff's office at a future meeting to brief us on what their preparations are for a large parade, demonstration, what have you, not including anything that they feel should be kept confidential, of course, but I'd like to be reassured that we're prepared just in case. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right, the chair. I'd sent out some requests for some dates for the retreat dates, and I didn't have a whole lot of success, so I hope y'all brought your calendars. But I'd like to try to hammer down a date that we can have this retreat. Mr. Skinner, I think you said you're not available any Saturdays, correct?
No, I'm not.
Is there any time during the week or
I'm available on Mondays.
Monday's it?
I'm sorry, that's it.
No other days of the week?
Sunday and Monday are my days off. I work all the other days.
Can we check our dates for Mondays? So let's say April, May. We might as well go to June to. If anybody wants to start out, you can have at it. Mr. Marshall, you may be best to look at you first since you, with your work schedule.
You were looking at May, you were thinking May 5th was the date you had sent on a Saturday? So
Yeah, well, Saturdays are out. Mr. Skinner.
I'm just trying to get something close in that same time frame. May 14th is a Monday.
May 14th. May 14th is good for the chair. Yes, no? Dr. Tramp is a yes. I got four of us so far. Yeah, I don't have a clue. May 14th, Mr. Yakubowski. What's it looking like, Mr. Ross?
At 1,800?
Oh, no. This will be most of the day. Unless you want to go most of the night.
Okay, listen,
Yes, Mr. Skinner?
I'd rather be the one that takes off work if you guys can't make it, so make it a Saturday. Be enough at morning. Okay, how about the, excuse me.
Well, we had the 5th, I think, of May that,
May 5th is what you said? Okay, hang on.
That's the only weekend I can't do out of the next 2 months.
all right. How about, let's look at the 12th.
May 12th.
May
You're
12th.
asking May 12th?
May 12th.
Got nothing
Good.
scheduled. May 12th, sir. I'll do it.
No?
So, how long is this, may I ask, Mr. Chairman, you plan to have us?
It's probably going to be 6 hours at least, I'd
What's
say.
your time frame, sir?
Let's do,
I can't go past 15:30 on Saturday, at the very latest.
15:30
3 o'clock in the afternoon is the latest for me.
yeah, let's do 8 o'clock.
We can start at 9 o'clock. Darn. I
Yeah.
was going to say 9.
Well, I can go earlier if you want. I'm up at 5, so
Can we do 9 to 3?
let's do 8 to 3. I want to make a full a day as we can get and try to get some of these issues done.
Do we actually know what the agenda is going to consist of, and do we know, let's do it this way. Let's please set the date for May 12th, and let's find out what you're going to cover and how long it's going to really take to cover. Because if we're sitting there for 7 hours just because we scheduled is not.
All right, how about this? We'll go May 12th. Mr. Taylor, if you'd please put that in bold. Tentatively 8 to 3. we'll put together a schedule. I'll get with Mr. Yakubowski and some of the others and see what everybody wants on it. And then we'll crunch some time, and if we can maneuver the time, we will. 9 to 3, 9 to 2, 10 to whatever. Plan on doing a lunch. And I can put in for that. Not paying for everybody, but I can pay for a part of it. So, so May 12th, tentatively, 8 to 3. Thank y'all for your help and cooperation on that. And Mr. Nelson, I think you're up, finally.
Give the floor, computer, please.
Good evening. Want to start off by talking about the last 4 to 5 days of rain that we've had. I think this region has experienced about 6 inches of rain in a very short amount of time. I am very fortunate that it was not snow, because we probably would still be digging out now. But with the rain has come a multitude of issues. We've had pipes fail on Benchmark Road, which I'll talk about later in my presentation. We've got flooding issues in Beau Claire. We've got flooding issues in other neighborhoods and along roadside areas. I want to let the board know over the last week the last 3 days in Spotsylvania County alone, we've taken on about 160 complaints from the public about drainage. One thing about drainage is water runs downhill. So some of the areas where we're getting these complaints, and this is to let you all know, is really not much we can do about it. The water's going to run downhill. If you have a home at the end of a cul-de-sac and you're down the bottom, you're likely going to get the water. The same thing with easements. If you have a home and you have a drainage easement behind your home, the water's going to flow down that drainage easement. If those easements are stopped up on private property, it's really not a part of the department's issue to clean those drainage easements unless it is causing an impact to the roadway. So as we're funneling through these complaints, we're going to go out and address each of them and try to clear up what we can within our purview. But I wanted to let you all know that we're trying to work as hard and as fast as we can to try to alleviate some of these drainage concerns. 6 inches of rain over a short amount of time is going to cause problems everywhere, and we are aware of that. One other thing that has happened, we've had some cold weather, we've had some warm weather, and it is wreaking havoc on our pavements. So we've authorized overtime for our crews to be out, continuing working every day as long as the weather's good and through the weekend to try to get some of these roads repaired as soon as we can. So we're aware of the issues that are out there. I ask that you all still communicate to everybody out in the public to call 1-800-4-ROAD so we can get you in the queue and we can track these work order requests as they come in. So now I will go on with my briefing. Starting the Battlefield District, Mr. Yakubowski, the project that was recently awarded smart scale funding at exit 126. We've done the survey work and we're working on preliminary design right now. We still have a schedule to have that project beginning construction in 2021. Next, I'll go to the Berkeley District. Mr. Marshall, we've got the Mud Tavern Road project to the east of I-95. That project is currently ongoing right now. The project is slated to be completed in September of next year. We just recently started the Route 17609 Thornton Rolling Road, where you've got the flashing signal. That's going to be going to a full signal with turn lanes. That project is slated to be completed in September of this year. Next, we've got preliminary engineering, the Route 658 Mount Olive Road Bridge project, which there is no bridge there now. That project has just been awarded. We're trying to work out to get the contractor in for a pre-con to work out the schedule of when they plan to execute this work. But we look for this project to be moving along pretty soon here. I'm also in the Berkeley District for the 606 project on the west. The project is still slated to be advertised in December of 2019. We had the public hearing in November. Now moving to the Chancellor District, the one project we've got right now in preliminary engineering is the Spotswood Furnace Road Rural Rustic project that I've got updates on. We've done the environmental work out there and we plan to hard surface that project in the spring or early summer. In the Cortland District, we've got the I-95 safety improvements at Route 3. The project's moving along fairly well. I've heard a positive response from the citizens regarding this project as we're moving along. Project is scheduled to be completed in January of next year. In the Lee Hill District, we had the Commonwealth Drive commuter lot. We had a public hearing on January 11th, which the public seemed to receive it fairly well. Project is scheduled to begin in 2020. In the Livingston District, we've got Woolfolk Road, the Rural Rustic Project. We've done the erosion and settlement plan, and we're working on the environmental work. We plan to hard surface that in the spring and summer. Salem District, I have no updates. We've got the VDOT study for the STARS program is what we call it, which is strategically targeted and affordable roadway solutions at I-95 northbound at exit 126. We had a project kickoff meeting in September. We're hoping to have this project wrapped up to maybe have some type of project that could be submitted either by the county or either potentially by FAMPO. Now to some of the roadway maintenance issues. I talked about the Benchmark Road. The roadway was closed yesterday. We're working on an emergency pipe replacement. We were planning to do this project because we knew that there were some issues with it, but we felt that the road was safe at the time to stay open while we were working on putting out a contract for a planned work to replace these pipes. The issue is there are 3 13-foot by 8-foot corrugated metal pipes. And if you all know anything about corrugated metal pipes, in the soils that we have in this area, they erode on the bottom. There's no bottom in these pipes. So we're going to replace these 3 pipes under an emergency and put back 3 12 by 10 concrete box culverts there. So hopefully once we do this, we won't have to go back for the foreseeable future. The road will remain closed until we complete the project. So our emergency contract right now is under development. We plan to have a contractor out there, if everything goes well, by next month to start work. We anticipate the project will take probably about 12 weeks to be completed, and we're going to put an incentive on it so the contractor will have an incentive to get the work done sooner than later. So we've reached out to the public. We sent out a news release regarding this. We set up message boards and a detour plan already. I also provided you via email today the resurfacing plan for 2018. So here's the list of all the roads that will be resurfaced in 2018. There's lots of work on Route 1 around the Harrison Road area to try to get that fully completed since we've done the project. We've got Mine Road, Spotsylvania Parkway is a big one that we'll be resurfacing, Orange Plank Road. There's a few subdivisions in there, not many. If you notice on the left side, there's a VDOT nomenclature over there called schedule. The ones where you're getting asphalt, which is what everybody likes, are the ones that are designated with a PM. So that means plant mix, or you're getting hot mix asphalt on those roads. The STs are surface treatment, which is tar and gravel, and the SS is going to be a combination of both latex, slurry seal, and surface treatment. It's something we call a Cape Seal, and we're going to put that in the state park, which if that project goes well, I would like to have a couple of board members come out to see it because maybe it's a cheaper, more affordable product that we can use to get more paving done throughout the years, because nobody likes to get the surface treatment, but unfortunately, it's something that we need to use because we can do a whole lot more of it with the money that we get. That's my report. Do you all have any?
All right. Any comments from the board? We'll start with Mr. Yakubowski.
Yes. Oop. There we go. Thank you. Just a quick thought that I had coming out of Washington and the transportation infrastructure discussions that they're having. I'm actually going to talk to my transportation appointee and see what we can do to make sure that we are ready to roll with projects. I know we have a lot that we've talked about, some that we're studying, and I would like to work with you all and have our staff and everybody be ready, working with our congressional delegations and senators to make sure that when money is out there and it's flowing, that we're ready to grab it and go.
Call it shovel ready.
But actual shovel ready this time, so that would be nice. So, but thank you.
No problem.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yeah, no report.
Mr. Ross?
I don't have anything, Sean. Thanks for all the work you're doing.
Dr. Champy? Mr. Marshall?
Just real quick, Sean, I'd like to thank VDOT for what they did on 606 today. I was going to bring that up to you. There were some very large potholes. You could lose a car in a couple of those.
Very much so.
You had, they were fixed today, so.
Yeah.
Good job. I appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem.
Mr. Skinner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hey, Sean, was that 1-800-FOR roads?
FORROAD.
Right, thank you.
Yep.
Just so that the constituents know that. The other thing is, this is funny, Lansdowne Road, but on the Fredericksburg side of the train crossing. I'm going to say it because all our constituents use that road. We've got about holes that are about this big, but they're only about that. I mean, it's not, people are slowing up for the train crossing anyway. But if you guys could take a look at that, because what people are doing is trying to get around on the left side, and other traffic's coming this way. So please take a look at it.
Gotcha.
Thank you very much, sir.
Problem.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay.
From the chair, Sean, just thank you again. I know all of us ask a whole lot of you, and I know you're giving us bits and pieces of what you can, most importantly, afford to do at this time and in the future. But I just appreciate you just Johnny on the spot as far as getting back to us and reacting to our requests for you. And it's just very much appreciated. Can't thank you enough.
All right, like I said, you all have some issues, just let me know. Thanks.
John, can I ask a question before you go, if I may,
Sure.
Mr.
Go ahead, Mr.
Chairman?
Chairman.
That is with the benchmark project. That also sounds like it's one of those cost issues, just like the surface treatments you described. The concrete, I take, is more expensive
Well,
than
no.
corrugated, or?
Not, well, that was a very old pipe. So at the time, I mean, we've got a lot of development out there, and we're facing this everywhere where where corrugated metal pipes were being utilized. Well,
Is
now
that still the standard, or have you shifted to
we're
concrete?
using concrete, and we're using the plastic
Great.
pipes
Good.
most of the time
Good.
now for our infrastructure.
Okay,
Yep.
thanks.
No problem.
Mr. Taylor? Presentations, I believe.
That, yes, sir. Well, that brings us to a presentation for finance for the FY18 budget that we are currently in, and the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award from the Government Finance Officers Association.
Good evening again. Based on examination of the county's fiscal year 18 budget, the budget we're currently in, by a panel of independent reviewers, the county has been awarded the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award by the Government Finance Officers Association, also known as GFOA. This award is the highest form of recognition in governmental budgeting. In order to receive the award, the county's budget document had to satisfy nationally recognized guidelines for effective budget presentation. These guidelines are designed to assess how well the budget document serves as a policy document, a financial plan, an operations guide, and a communications device. Budget documents that are reviewed must be rated proficient in all 4 categories and in the 14 mandatory criteria within those categories to receive the award. This is the 22nd year that the county's budget has been awarded the GFOA's Distinguished Budget Presentation Award, but is the first time the budget has received the special capital recognition. Such special recognition is awarded when the capital projects portion of the budget document is rated outstanding by each member of the review panel. Last year, of the 1,623 governments in the United States and Canada who were awarded this Distinguished Budget Presentation Award, only 13 of those localities, or 0.8%, achieved the special capital recognition. The Spotsylvania budget staff is very pleased to join Leesburg and Prince William as the only Virginia localities to achieve this special recognition. The budget staff spends significant time calculating the figures for, writing, and fine-tuning the annual budget document. We continually look for ways to make the material more easily understood, current, relevant, and informative. We could not prepare the annual budget document without the information and assistance that's provided to us by staff members in every other office and department throughout the organization, as well as from the staff from the schools. This achievement is a credit to all who are involved in the annual budget process, a lot of whom are in attendance tonight. So if it's okay with you, we'd like to come and have our picture with you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
if I could just say a few words to thank my staff for that. To quote a county administrator from many years ago, whether you agree with what the outcome of the budget or not is, this award is not about the outcome of the budget, it's about the information in that budget document. And these three ladies go out of their way to make sure that the 7 of you have everything you need to make the decisions. And I really appreciate the effort they make, appreciate the effort that staff makes to work with them. I think county staff will tell you there are a lot of questions, a lot of emails, a lot of information that goes around, and it is our intention and our job, we see it, to give you every piece of information possible to make that happen, and it only happens because of Bonnie, Holly, and Barbara, and I don't take that for granted, so thank you.
And Bonnie, thank you for your leadership as well.
Well, congratulations again to all of you. And Ms. Sorrell, noticed you did not come up and get in the picture there. That's slick. No, congratulations. Y'all do an outstanding job. And if the audience only knew of the number of questions and demands, requests, however you want to say it, put on these ladies, it's amazing they can get anything else accomplished. All right, Mr. Taylor.
Chief Cullinan, here for the presentation and endorsement of your 2018 strategic plan. Good evening.
If I can give the floor computer, please. All right. Tonight, I would like to provide you with an overview of the 2018 strategic plan for your Department of Fire Rescue and Emergency Management. As the county's estimated population of 135,000 continues to grow and demand for services increase, the department requires a theoretic roadmap to guide its efforts for the future, both immediate and long term. While the department has been successful in many ways and through the development, implementation, and management of numerous initiatives over the years, it has lacked a formalized long-term plan that assures the entire organization is on the same track moving forward. This strategic plan provides that necessary guidance for budgeting and resource allocation, providing a listing of specific goals and objectives with estimated timelines for the tasks associated with them for resource planning purposes. In writing the strategic plan, we've actually revised our mission, vision, and added an action statement. So our mission statement, in short, is to help others. Preserving life and property through prompt and skillful all-hazard emergency response, incident prevention, education, and community engagement. And our vision is to provide the best service possible to our community through continued dedication and pursuit of excellence, while always seeking opportunities to positively impact the lives of others. Our action statement, which will drive kind of everything that we're doing as we look at various processes, is that we will continually reevaluate the way we do things today in an effort to plan for tomorrow, rather than defend the way we have always done things. The plan contains 8 overarching goals. I'll go through those relatively briefly. So goal 1 you'll see on your screen is to develop a workforce that is prepared to achieve the mission and vision of the Department of Fire Rescue and Emergency Management while exemplifying our core values. The objectives under goal 1 focus on the recruitment and retention of career and volunteer responders while also seeking opportunities to improve their general health and wellness, as well as provide greater preparation for advancement through different levels of the department. Goal 2 is to enhance fire and EMS staffing and stations to meet current and future response needs. The objectives contained under Goal 2 focus on enhancing staffing stability and capacity in our combination system for today and tomorrow, while also providing greater flexibility and opportunity for volunteers to serve in a variety of roles and functions. It also focuses on an increased effort to develop automatic aid agreements with all surrounding jurisdictions to benefit citizens living in areas along the perimeter of the county. Goal 3 is to enhance the county's overall ability to prepare for, respond to, recover from, and mitigate hazards, emergencies, and disasters. Goal 3 essentially focuses on the enhancement of emergency planning and management capabilities for large-scale incidents that may impact the county or the region. Goal 4 is to develop process and data management systems that meet the current and future needs of the department. These objectives focus on putting a greater emphasis on using data and process analysis to assure the services being planned and provided meet the specific needs of the community and are conducted in an efficient manner. Goal 5 is to develop an optimized community-driven service delivery model, which focuses on evaluating and establishing service levels and capabilities while seeking new or revised methods to achieve them based on community-specific needs. Goal 6 is to develop an effective and comprehensive training and credentialing program. The objectives in Goal 6 focus on building upon an already strong foundation of training within the department to enhance officer training, special services training, and ongoing continuing training to achieve an ever-increasing level of competency in all levels and functions of the department. Goal 7 is to utilize technology efficiently and effectively within the department to meet current and future needs. The objectives under Goal 7 focus on continuing to work with the Information Services Department to identify and implement technology that provides efficiencies in response capabilities and business practices within the department. And finally, Goal 8 is to develop a comprehensive community risk reduction model, which focuses on greater public outreach and interaction in an effort to develop a safer community through education and prevention. As with any plan, it's recognized that an element of fluidity must be maintained to adjust both timelines and objectives to meet the specific needs that may develop or change beyond what has been anticipated during the planning process. This initial strategic plan was developed in a somewhat abbreviated process, seeking input and feedback from internal and external stakeholders through both formal and informal means, while not establishing a formalized work group to fulfill the structure and magnitude of a planning process that would provide a longer-term plan. This abbreviated process was used to develop a plan that will provide guidance to the department for a period of the next 4 years, towards the end of which a more in-depth evaluation and planning process will be conducted to develop a longer-term strategic plan for the following 5 to 7 years. Tonight, I am asking for your formal endorsement of this strategic plan to provide the structured guidance needed for the department to continue to help others in our community. So at this point, I welcome any questions or comments that you may have.
Board members have any questions? Mr. McLaughlin.
Chief, is there anything in your way from achieving these goals? So is there anything that's a roadblock or a thing that might interfere with you achieving these goals?
The plan itself contains, of course, a SWOT analysis. So there are certain items in there that we're going to have to, challenges that we're going to have to confront. Some of that is both going to be internal as well as those, outside influences on what goes on in the department and countywide. Right. So nothing that we see that is insurmountable. So I think we should be able to continue to proceed. So
one other question is, I know you talk about this year, kind of your 4-year initial plan. When will you have these 8 goals at least initially established? Are they in the works today? Will they be by the end of the fiscal year or the end of the year they'll be up and running, or what's your timeline?
Each of the 8 goals has, so they each have various objectives and various action items underneath each objective. I would say all 8 have components that are currently in the works. Okay. So we are working on those objectives already. There's additional ones that will come on board, the next 2 to 3 years. But I anticipate us being able to achieve a lot of it within the 4 years of the plan. And I'll also add, a lot of the objectives in this plan include doing analysis and collecting data that will then help us drive the next plan. So there's a lot of things that we need to look at to really answer some difficult questions as we move forward beyond this.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? I'll just say, I commend you, Chief, and I have to also speak of the volunteers also in moving to have that true combination system. And I know it's going to be discussed probably later on in budget discussions, but with the trying to get ALS in all stations 24/7. And it does take cooperation from all parties and
Absolutely.
everybody involved. And I appreciate the outreach that you've done and the attempts to work through all the issues that are involved, which I'm sure are overwhelming at times. But I just appreciate that, and it's going to be, hopefully in the very near future, a very proud day for their Spotsylvania. You can say they can actually have a true combination system.
Absolutely. We've got a lot of good people who earn paychecks and who don't earn paychecks that are committed to this community.
Absolutely. So I thank you. Want a motion?
Motion to approve?
All right. We have a motion to approve by Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Yakubowski? Aye. Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
Chair is aye. Congratulations, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you for your mention of those who don't earn paychecks. We can't do it without the volunteers. You've got a great team. Good stuff. That brings us to the budget presentation, Mr. Chairman. And
Well, I believe two of us have to have some disclosure statements read. Mr. Marshall, you all right? Well, I'll go ahead and do mine. At the advice of our attorney, and I thought I was away from this thing, but as a board member, I have the option to continue with the health care from the county. So at his advice, he's suggesting that I have to read this disclosure. It is only because I'm paying for my health insurance through the county. But I hereby disclose I have an interest in the budget transaction as a retired employee of the county. My disclosure is on file with the clerk and is available to the public for review. Mark, Amy, please record this disclosure in the minutes of this meeting as required by law. So thank you. Mr. Marshall.
I also had to read a disclosure statement due to my employment with the county working with fire and rescue. I hereby disclose I have an interest in the budget transaction as an employee of the county. My disclosure is on file with the clerk and is available to the public for review. Mark and Amy, please record this disclosure in the minutes of the meeting as required by law. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Taylor and Ms. Jewell and Ms. Earl, the floor is yours.
And we're excited to be here presenting County Administrator's recommended budget for FY19, particularly after Bonnie's presentation of the award for the budget presentation for 18. It can only get better, right?
Yes.
I'm trusting you, Bonnie, I'm trusting you. All right, let's get to it. The hard copies are being passed out. I hope you don't find those too distracting. I wanted to start with a look at where we are relative to the 2007 recession and the county's overall situation and how we've evolved over the last several years. So you can see we have over 5,900 jobs added since 2007. Three-quarters of 1,000 new business establishments, but yet we're not back to pre-recession levels. The unemployment rate is steadily improving. In fact, the unemployment rate for December was down to 3.7%, but it's still notable that about three-quarters of our workforce out-commutes, and the average commute is still greater than half an hour. There's still a huge need for jobs in community. The cost of the commute is very impactful for our citizens. Census data from the U.S. Census puts Spotsylvania's 2016 median household income at just over $81,000. That puts us in the top 3% of the United States. We're the 91st best median household income out of 3,193 counties, cities, and states across the country. So we're relatively well off And at the same time, as the schools have observed in their meeting, school board meeting last evening, our per pupil spending is below average in our state. But also, our fire and rescue response times are higher than we would like them to be. Our sheriff needs has additional needs for resources that he sees wanting in our community. Our criminal justice resources and demands our share of the cost of the jail, as you'll see, is going up. And our residents look to the Board of Supervisors to balance all of these interests and concerns and needs while adjusting the tax rates. Now, in the period from 2007 to 2018, the county's population has increased by about 15%, and that's increased our demand for services as well, of course. The number of housing units has increased by about 5,000 since 2009, with the majority being single-family detached units. Our planning director says that our county's growth rate appears to be healthy and positive, considering the overall population trends in the Commonwealth. And this growth rate seems sustainable, but I must note that this observation is made without consideration of the cost of additional infrastructure, especially additional school buildings that will inevitably be needed as growth continues, even at the present sustainable rate. So to be clear, there's not a new school in the current school division CIP, not yet, but we see with a growing population that need is inevitable in our future. Taxable real estate values, again, looking back to the era of the recession in 2007, assessed values topped out at $16.2 billion in 2009, but when it came time for the 2010 reassessment, values had fallen 22% and declined again in 2012. Since then, values have been climbing, and for 2018, they're expected to be $15.4 billion. The values have been climbing, and new construction is factored in to the 2018 total assessed value shown here. We're still about $900 million short in terms of overall assessed value in comparison to the 2009 peak. For context, that $900 million equates to $7.3 million in revenue at the equalized tax rate. So we're doing well overall, but the county is still catching up to where we were in the overall value of real estate assessed property in 2009. Now, I joked with the staff that when we finally had gotten the technology together to be able to implement fractional tax rates, that would be something suitable for a vanity plate. So that explains this slide. The technology is in place for us to look at fractional real estate and fractional tax rates. And so the equalized tax rate at the reassessment, 2018 reassessment, current rate is 85 cents. The equalized rate with consideration of the reassessment would be 81.64 cents. And we can now do fractional rates down to the 2 decimal places. The FY 2019 recommended budget that you'll see is based on the equalized rate of 81.64. Highlights of this budget. First of all, as I mentioned in comments earlier, there's a high degree of correlation with the board's expressed priorities. And we'll circle back with the scorecard on ourselves at the end of this presentation, but recalling from the pre-budget public hearing and questionnaire that Bonnie sent around and other inputs that we've collected from the board, both at the pre-budget public hearing and since, we've tried to take all input and guidance from the board to identify your priorities for this budget and to follow your priorities to the greatest extent possible. We've also tried to pay attention to the need to provide additional funding for priority services. And when I say priority services, I'm really speaking about education, public safety, and transportation. And again, those are all areas where there are needs that continue to grow. The proposed budget does continue the 3-year phased implementation of the Evergreen Compensation Study and does make a recommendation account for the first of 3 years of the school's implementation of their Evergreen. And of course, as you would expect of us, the proposed budget maintains compliance with all fiscal policies that have been adopted by the board. So the recommended budget starts for FY19 as we begin each recommended budget. We start with the prior year's adopted budget as our base. We remove one-time costs and one-time funding from the prior year's budget and adjust the base cost up or down to reflect what's expected for the next fiscal year. After that, new budget requests are considered. So from the outset of the development of the 19 budget, we wanted to address prior year surpluses and adjust our forecasting and projections to try to reduce the degree, tighten our projections so that we're more on target and have a lower ending fund balance at the end of the year. On the revenue side of the budget, based on review of 2018 receipts through the beginning of December of last year, we revised projections for the FY 2018 revenue and then used those revised projections as a takeoff point for making FY 19 and out year further projections. By these refinements, we've increased future revenue projection by $2.5 million from the start. On the expense side of the budget, we know that we see savings routinely that come from the lapse and turnover of positions, that when vacancies occur, they're not refilled immediately, and so funds are accumulated unspent during the time that the positions remain vacant. In an effort to enhance the accuracy of our forecasting, staff reviewed the budget performance of all personnel budget line items over the past 3 years and is including in the overall budget reduction to the base personnel cost for 19 to capture the lapse and turnover savings. So in other words, we're reducing projected expenditures by $1.9 million. So overall, that is a $4.4 million tightening of our projections going forward. The end of the year fund balance at FY 2017 was $12 million, and that included $3.4 million that was from the FY 16 end of year balance. The revenue and expenditures adjustments made that I've just explained, together with the revenue adjustments made during the development of the 18 budget, are expected to eliminate or at least significantly decrease our surplus that we would see at the end of future fiscal year. Now, so the left side is revenue, right side is expenditures, and again, this is looking at the base budget. On the revenue side, the left side, base changes in revenue to include transfers in and use of fund balance is $8.6 million. Additionally, we proposed the use of $8 million of the available fund balance to fund in the CIP office space for social services and the health department. On the expenditure side, the right side of the screen, base expenditures are increasing by $12.5 million, but this includes a transfer of the $8 million from the available fund balance to the CIP for the Social Services and Health Department facility. So net of that transfer, base expenditures are increasing by $4.5 million. Now recall that the FY18 transfers to the schools included $333,222 in one-time money. And since that was one-time money for 2018, we remove it from the 2019 base budget. So after those adjustments are all made, we had $4.5 million to work with. And of that amount, we're recommending that $3 million be transferred to the schools to fund approximately just under $1.5 million in net new debt service that the schools have programmed per their CIP, and combine the balance, the other $1.5 million will combine with $7 million that they're seeing additional revenue from the state to address, at least partially, implementation of the school's Evergreen Compensation Study. So this is together a total of $3 million in new local ongoing fund transfer to the school division. After the increased transfer to the schools, there was still $1.5 million to work with. We've used that funding to recommend new public safety initiatives, 2 satellite library branches, one at Spotsylvania Town Center and the other in the Berkeley district. You'll hear a little bit more about those in a minute, but remember the library branches have just an initial year higher investment to get started, and a number of other smaller initiatives. Additionally, I'm recommending that the personal property rate, including automobiles, campers, motorcycles, motorhomes, and RVs, heavy trucks and trailers, and also the rate for boats and boat trailers be reduced each by 3 pennies. So overall, in the recommended budget, we're looking at a $16.5 million increase in revenue. Again, this includes increases the staff made to address end-of-year surpluses to tighten up our forecasts. And that in addition to use of the $8 million from the end-of-year fund balance to fund capital investment with cash for the Social Services and Health Department. It factors in the 3 penny reduction in personal property tax rates. It reflects that the SAFER grant awarded to the county in FY17 and FY18 for 9 firefighter medics will no longer be available in 19. So we're absorbing the funding for those positions. Altogether, the use of the fund balance includes the first-year startup and operating costs for the 2 library satellites of $315,802. Use of the Economic Opportunities Reserve for other tax-based incentives for $270,000. Various Parks and Rec minor capital improvements that are included in the operating budget, that's just $81,500. Costs associated with some service relocations in the Marshall Center of $57,000, and 3 additional devices for cleaning fire turnout gear for a total of $36,000. It's also a towed side scan sonar system. This is to support search and rescue and recovery efforts down at Lake Anna. That sonar system is a cost of $30,000. There's a use of reserve tourism revenue for some wayside informational signs and exhibits of $21,000, replacement of a freezer at the animal shelter, use of tourism funds for expansion of the museum collection. These are all $20,000 items or less. A small set aside for the county's 300th anniversary that's coming up of under $15,000. An equipped trailer for Parks and Rec events, a rebuild of the sheriff's office total station equipment. That's really a safety item for the sheriff of $10,000. Some heating units in the sheriff's office, dispatch consoles, and other small items together totaling $8,905,673. Look at notable changes to the general fund. And again, top of the list is the second year of the Evergreen implementation. There's also funding of 1/5 of our annual required contribution to our OPEB liability. Maintenance of ongoing service contracts. There is an increase. This is actually the net of a larger increase, partially offset by some savings at the juvenile, or decrease at the juvenile detention center, for a net increase of $536,000 for the jail and juvenile detention center combined. The full year funding for the 6 firefighter medic positions that have been added during this fiscal year. Increases to social services programs and mandated CSA costs, and full funding for the library's request per our agreement with them at $204,000. I'm going to point out in connection with OPEB, the county's been accruing liability, as you know, for future health insurance benefits that current employees will receive based on current policy when they retire. Retiree health insurance benefits are paid on a pay-as-you-go basis, but as employees retire, our annual payments will continue to increase in the out years. Our current total general fund liability is $76.6 million. To meet this liability, actuaries have calculated that the annual required contribution, or ARC, is $6.4 million, and that's in addition to the $1.2 million that we pay annually for current retiree health insurance coverage. For the past several years, OPEB contributions have been funded for the small county funds, such as code compliance and transportation. County policy requires that once we begin funding OPEB, which we did at the very end of 2016, the OPEB contribution for the general fund, full funding of the ongoing ARC needs to occur within 8 years. So the one-time set-aside of $1.9 million from the fund balance in FY16 for OPEB kicked off the 8-year funding process, and leaving us now with 5 years left to achieve ongoing contribution to cover OPEB by 2023. $1,278,330, or 1/5 of the $6.4 million ARC, is set aside in our recommended budget as progress toward meeting the full ARC no later than fiscal year 2023. Approximately $541,000 is added to maintenance service contract accounts, and these are primarily information services multi-year service accounts. And again, the $204,000 for the library is their budget request per our agreement with them. Other notable changes include janitorial services contracts that are expected to increase by $117,000 in FY19 due to the addition of several locations to be cleaned by our outsourced vendor. The cost is partially offset by a reduction in part-time staff funding as we move several additional locations from in-house forces to the outsourced contract. $104,000 is added to the budget for the fire and rescue training. This increase is largely due to revised state requirements for EMT certification. So this is another example of the state giving us the requirement but not the funds necessary to meet their imposition. Our contribution to Germana, you'll see here, is reduced in FY 2019 due to FY 18 being the last year of our 7-year capital contribution. Again, these are the other notable changes here. This is, in accountancy terms, the explanation of the recommended changes in transfer to the schools. Remember that the $333,222 in FY 18 was one-time money. And so the net difference is $2,666,778, but the real commitment for FY 19 is a $3 million ongoing transfer to the schools. And this chart tabulates some of the changes that we have previously explained in just a little bit greater detail, and adds a few not previously mentioned. The satellite library branch at the town center, this pulls apart the cost of the two library satellites. The town center satellite is identified at $280,752, and that's with the technology and some other hard costs involved in starting up that satellite. The out-year operational cost of that satellite will not be so great. In fact, that operation will wind into our regular contribution to the library. If you recall, in our library agreement, we make an exceptional investment for new facilities, and then once they're in place, simply provide ongoing share of the operation of the library per our agreement. Also set aside near the bottom is $40,000 for the Berkeley District Library Branch, and Supervisor Marshall has been working on location for that. Also included, as requested by the sheriff, are the conversion of 5 part-time animal shelter assistants to 4 full-time positions, additional overtime in the amount of $70,000 for law enforcement, the addition of 2 animal control deputies, also the conversion of some positions in economic development and tourism, the translation of 10 part-time counselor positions to 4 full-time economic development and tourism assistant positions. And at the top of the list, 6 additional positions for ALS staffing for FREM at Company 1. That, of course, is the lead item at $343,374. And sorry to be frenetic and jump about, but at the bottom of that list is the conversion of 1 part-time family services worker to full-time for social services. Also, the towed side scan sonar system, the $30,000 set aside for expansion, or recommended for the expansion of the museum collection, the addition of a social services part-time eligibility aide, the conversion of a social services part-time bilingual aide to full-time, additional median mowing. This was a item that got mentioned from several supervisors. Also an equipped trailer for Parks and Rec events This is not so much to support new initiatives as it is to make the manning of existing and ongoing services more convenient and efficient by allowing them to store equipment that they move around in a mobile situation for their convenience and more rapid deployment. The sheriff's office total station equipment, heaters in the dispatch consoles, temporary overfill of deputy treasurer position, and also a sonar device in the sheriff's office. So bringing it all together, there's $16.5 million in increased revenue, including transfers in and the use of fund balance, that matches the $16.5 million in changes to the base budget, new initiatives, and the net transfer to the schools. And again, that is all at the 8164. All of this is at the equalized rate of 8164. And again, the recommended budget necessarily adheres to adopted fiscal policies, making these changes. In capital projects, Mary, did you want to say something? No. Okay. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. The summary of capital projects in the recommended budget. Let's talk about transportation projects. The CIP for transportation projects includes the county share of projects for which revenue sharing has been awarded or applied, a placeholder for implementation of findings from the corridor studies currently underway for Route 1, Route 2 and 17, and Route 208, and funding to bring the VDOT, bring to VDOT standards the roads in Bloomsbury subdivision, Mr. Benton, so VDOT will accept those roads into the state system. Also a right turn lane off Lansdowne Road onto Route 2, Mr. Skinner, and funding for a study of revitalization of Route 1, Mr. Yakubowski, Mr. Skinner, and I think all of us after certain events this week. I wanted to vote some of our upcoming budget and CIP work session discussions to a discussion of transportation funding. For quite some time now, Mary and Bonnie have been alerting us to the fact that additional funding from the general fund will be needed to balance the transportation fund. And consequently, the past two budgets have included a $700,000 transfer from the general fund. For FY 2019, nearly twice that amount is needed to begin a plan for long-term solvency for the transportation fund, to give one-time expenses like the Fred bus service and annual subsidies to the VRE, and also to provide new debt service associated with planned capital expenditures for road projects that are already in our plan. So as part of tonight's presentation, we want the board to be aware that to meet our transportation funding need for FY19, the budget assumes that $673,370 in accumulated and reserved set-asides are being used to fund the transportation fund. This simply bridges the gap for 2019. Going forward, unless the planned expenditures are altered, on top of the base $700,000 transfer from the general fund, future transportation funds will need another $1.1 million from the general fund in 2020. That's a cumulative transfer of $1.8 million. Then on top of that, they'll need another $1 million in 2021, or a transfer of $2.8 million in 2021. They'll need another $500,000 on top of that in 2022, and another $500,000 on top of that in 2023. So again, the need for this ongoing funding can be impacted by altering the plan, of course, but absent that, these transfers are in our immediate future and will mean that this funding will not be available for general fund purposes. Now, I also want to talk for just a minute about a practice that we've had of set-asides of money from special tax districts, basically a tithe or 10% of revenue from special tax districts being set aside to fund transportation projects. The challenge with that approach is a matter of tracking in our finance department, because that little 10% set aside from special service districts requires tracking of approximately 100 different parcels of real estate in the 4 different special service districts. And with our current systems in place, that process is entirely manual. With the one solution, Jane, I haven't asked you this question, just sit there in that row and nod up and down, yes. When we do implement one solution July 1st of 2019, we should have the system capability to automate this type of set-aside, but presently this is an entirely manual process to track a 10% set-aside from over 100 different parcels of land from 4 different special service districts. It is laborious, particularly relative to the benefits secured. And it's performed primarily by the Commissioner of Revenue's office and the Treasurer's office, with some involvement with finance as well. That 10% equates to about $760,000 a year. And with a base transfer of $700,000 to the transportation fund, along with what will in the near future be a multi-million-dollar additional transfer, we're essentially using those set-asides and a lot more. So the set-asides are going to get lost anyway in the traffic of our increasing need to transfer money from the general fund to the transportation fund. So as such, we want to ask if the board would see with us a way forward to forego the set-aside of the tithe from the special service districts that is so labor-intensive, and move forward simply with addressing the transportation fund by transfer from the general fund. We all love this slide because it helps our budget make sense. And I want to underscore that this is an approximate breakdown of the average residential real property tax bill. This includes only expenditures funded by our local tax revenue. So since we don't pay for the food, the school food service out of local funds, that's passed through from the federal government, this breakdown does not include that local transfer. It's not factored in. Also, the public works cost indicated includes, it's $48. It includes both maintenance of county facilities and the cost of solid waste disposal, but it does not include the water and sewer system, because that is a separate operational fund, and it is operated and supported through user fees. So this breakdown is just for programs and activities that are funded by our local tax revenue. And this is the breakdown of the recommended budget, again at the equalized rate of 8164, with a proposed $3 million transfer of ongoing money to the schools and other details that you'll see in the proposed budget. At the equalized rate. Before we get into certain items that the recommended budget does not do and how those might be addressed, I wanted to talk about the priorities identified by the board back in October and how the proposed budget performs relative to those identified priorities. Development of the FY19 recommended budget started, as I've explained, with soliciting input from the community, the pre-budget public hearing process, and from the board. And since then, we've continued to receive input from the board, and we've tried to consolidate that and pay attention to priorities. So as outlined in the next few slides, there's a very high degree of correlation between the recommendations made and the priorities expressed and the guidance provided by the board. Right at the top of the list, I'll say that the yellow highlights deal with compensation-related items, and the red check marks indicate items that we believe the recommended budget effectively addresses regarding the board's priorities. And again, that list continues. And I'll note the omissions here because I know there was discussion of decrease or elimination of B-poll or the elevation of the B-poll threshold. We were not able to recommend that. Mr. Benton, we do have a number for the third year implementation of Evergreen. We were not able to recommend that at the equalized rate. The reduction in gun permit fees, we were not able to recommend. But look at the check marks that are here, including funding for that increase, the revised scope of work for the animal shelter, even with there were also increases in the estimates for that work. A small reduction in the personal property tax rate, 3 cents. An increase in cash funding to CIP projects to reduce our borrowing, funding for some road projects, a revitalization project for Route 1, and funding for the libraries. We also provide, we believe, reasonably toward the school's implementation of their first year of 3 of Evergreen. And I say that because we need to recognize that we are not the school's only source of revenue. And I think it was reasonable in our estimation to apprehend that at least a portion of the $7 million that's recommended in the state budget for them would be useful for compensation. So when all funds are included, the FY19 recommended budget totals $527 million. It's an increase of 24.3 million, or 4.8% compared to the FY18 adopted budget. And when capital projects funds are excluded, the FY19 recommended budget is a $17.4 million or 3.8% increase over 2018. The figures here, and as represented in the previous slides, again, are reflective of the equalized rate, that 81.64, and a 3-penny reduction in the base personal property rate and the personal property rate applicable to boats and trailers. So, broadly put, there's an awful lot that we can accomplish at the equalized rate. Now, the school's budget gap is $2 million. Should you wish to fund that gap, that would require a 1.49 cent increase or investment from the real estate rate. And again, this slide, I want to say, represents for me addressing what has been a request and priority of the board for several years. Mr. McLaughlin, I think you've most frequently requested this, but several board members have asked, what would each of the things that are requested cost as an adjustment to the tax rate? These are requests beyond the equalized rate, not just the school's gap, it's the largest one, but there were also requested by our departments various initiatives that cannot be funded or cannot be recommended for funding at the equalized rate. But here is the fractional penny on the real estate rate cost in the right-hand column of each of the initiatives requested by departments that were not in the recommended budget, but that may be afforded either by taking items out of the recommended budget or by adding to the real estate tax rate in the amounts indicated in the right-hand column. So there at the top is the school gap, which is almost 1.5 pennies. Fire and Rescue had requested 24/7 ALS staffing at Company 4. That is between 1/4 and 1/3 of a penny, as is 24/7 ALS staffing at Company 8. 24/5 Fire and Rescue staffing that would require 3 firefighters is an additional 12/100ths of a penny. Addition of a fire marshal position, 7/100ths. Fire and Rescue and the Sheriff's Office, I'll say, both talked about the significance and importance, the need for better community outreach, I'll say, from public safety together. And I've wanted to encourage the departments to talk about a combined increase in community outreach and public safety. Presence of public safety seems to be the one thing most notable in affecting or moving the needle with the opioid crisis. Fire and Rescue addresses or has asked to address public outreach using a civilian public education specialist at a cost of $92,000, almost $600, or 7/100ths of a penny on the real estate rate. The Sheriff's Office version of that request is with crime prevention and community policing, a deputy, and I think there's more related to that on the following slide. Ahead of that, though, are the sheriff's request for additional communications officers and operators. And again, here's the fractional penny real estate rate cost of those initiatives. The sheriff had other requests that we, again, were not able to cover in the recommended budget at the equalized rate. A training coordinator, further additional overtime. Recall there was, I think, $70,000 in overtime in the recommended budget. This is a request for yet further overtime. Communications on call funding, Marine Patrol overtime, courts overtime increases, psych testing for applicants, Also, some IS initiatives, additional GIS development services, the implementation of electronic signatures. This has been an ask for several years that just doesn't seem to make it into the recommended budget. It's 4/100ths of a penny. It is not, frankly, it's not a great cost. It's also not a considerable impact in terms of staff effort on the front end of moving documents through the execution process. But I believe that in the long run, electronic signatures will enhance our ability to efficiently archive and accurately store and efficiently recapture stored documents. It's also a request for a special projects manager in economic development with major prospects and projects that we've been undertaking in economic development. There are actually several additional initiatives requested there. We've been demonstrating good return on investment through those efforts. It's also some additional regional marketing funds, some regional tourism marketing funding, and some prospect development funding. That gun permit fee reduction that was not, it was a identified priority but not shown, able to be included in the recommended budget, is a 0.04 of a cent initiative. And the increase in tax relief. This had been an item that had been a discussion with a couple of supervisors, and one that I had been trying to include in the recommended budget but struggled to find funding for it. The threshold, the maximum allowable relief afforded to the elderly in our community under real estate tax relief has not been adjusted in, I believe, this is now the third reassessment. The adjustment from $1,200 to $1,500 in the maximum allowable relief really would hold those qualifying persons harmless from the 2018 reassessment and the last two reassessments. So it's an adjustment that is intended or calculated to make them whole from adjustments over this and the last two preceding reassessments, which covers the period from when that was last touched. Finally, we wanted to show the value or cost of the removal of each penny from the personal property tax rate. Each penny on the personal property tax rate costs or involves $60,000 on the budget, and a penny on the real estate rate. Bonnie, why am I blanking on that? $1.4 million. Thank you. And so that is the full scan of requests made by the departments and their costs. So our next steps. School board will be with us this Thursday for a presentation of their budget to you. And our constitutional officers and county departments are invited to be here also with input they may have in that work session. And next Tuesday is a budget work session scheduled for the budget and the CIP. And we do need, because it is a reassessment year, and so we have a long advertisement requirement and therefore a short schedule, a decision on the tax rate to advertise next Tuesday.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Any discussion from the board? Any questions? Dr. Traby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to look at slide 11. the revenue changes, removing the one-time item and the state and federal items, which look like they come close to balancing each other out anyway. Looks like we're left with about 8 million increase in local taxes. And that is compared to the projected revenues for FY 2018, or the original projected revenues, or adjusted projected revenues.
These are, what's shown here are the revenue changes from the fiscal year 18 adopted budget.
Okay.
So these do factor in for fiscal year 19 what I expect to be increased projections for fiscal year 18.
So out of an expected $8 million increase, we're increasing ongoing funds to the schools, 3 of that 8 million.
Correct.
And if I could turn to the slide everybody loves, which was slide 21. Would it be possible to get this slide, or however it changes when we finish the adopted budget, would it be possible to have this chart included along with folks' tax bills? And that may be something that the treasurer needs to answer, and perhaps at a later date, but I wanted to throw that question out.
We'll check on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else? Mr. Skinner?
Thank you. That same one that we were looking at, 21, when you look at the school transfer, and again, you sort of identified where this money is, and you were here, Mark, many years ago, that the schools used to get a % of the undesignated revenue. Right, Bonnie?
That's correct.
Is this what we are now coming down to, similar to this, that now we've dropped from over the years from 68% to now 53.6%? And if so, why have we, this is, I think this is one of the questions the school will ask us. We've always asked it. They've been involved with that. So I guess my first question is, did I understand this slide right?
This is just the tax-supported piece of all revenue and how that breaks out. Tax-supported piece of all expenditures and how that breaks out. So if you look at all undesignated revenues, not just the tax piece of all undesignated revenues, the schools receive 57.9% of all undesignated revenues.
Okay. And that's gone down since many years ago from close to 68% is what I remember, down to now 57. So over about 11% it's decreased over the years. And I think that's one of the things we've got to look at, because over those years when we've decreased that, that's been a loss to the schools. And I mean, multiple millions of dollars have not gone to the school because we have taken, that money and not designated the schools like we used to.
Excuses. Part of our discussion here is that in the intervening time, I think part of the time period that you're recalling, Mr. Skinner, and I certainly recall it as well, we were building sometimes multiple schools at one time. And my comments early on, talking about our growth rate and other kind of broader statistics in the community, I'm apprehensive that we need to be looking forward in the future to a need for additional school facilities and be looking at that cost. And I would apprehend that we may, in out years, soon be back at looking at that kind of percentage, because that total transfer includes the school's debt service, which will inevitably grow and grow significantly if we're back in the school building business.
But we will be, because I believe in your comments tonight, you said it currently is not in their CPI.
Right.
But
We're
then
looking
I-
forward to, we want to know when that is, because we need to, as we
Well,
think about.
I see an increase over the population here.
Yes, sir.
And you're showing us a good chart here tonight. So my question is, it's going to happen. And it may not be in this CPI, but I think even if we look, are we going to be able to support the schools as we did in the future? And it's a loaded question maybe, but we don't know what the future brings, but I don't think it's going to have another recession. And we've shown that we've increased, we're back up to the real estate value, you said, $900 million to reach what we were back in 2009.
We're $7 million in county revenue still off of that.
That date, okay.
Off of 2009.
Okay, and I know that sounds like a very big number, but what I'm concerned about is that when we reach that back up to those real estate values, it's probably because we're going to need the schools. And I think we have to be very concerned about where we just can't be sideswiped by this coming up in the future. And so I'm, we need to be prepared to help the schools out to build when we build these new places that we put applications in approved. And I think it's moving quicker than I ever expected. I didn't think we were at 133,000 people now, pretty close to it.
Yeah.
And we've shown an increase every year in that one slide, so.
Yes, sir. I think it's actually 136.
Yeah, I think you did say 136.
Yeah.
I thought it was 133, but is it 136 at this point?
136.
Wow. And that was brought up because of the last census we had? How do we figure, we had a census taken, 2 years ago?
We had a biennial update.
This is based on the last information that the census actually published, which was just 1 year ago, and then based on the past 5 or so years' worth of growth, planning estimates what the 2018 population will be, and that estimate is 136,000. So it's based off of the most recent real census data that's available.
Okay, thank you very much, appreciate it. That's it, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. McLaughlin?
Quick question, on slide 22, on the bottom it says implement FRs, 24/7 staffing plans for ALS for companies 1, 4, and 8. That's in the budget. Then on slide 26, it's showing company 4 and company 8 not funded. What's the
Optimistic check mark, Mr. McLaughlin. Company 1 is funded in the recommended, 4 and 8 are not.
So slide 22 is wrong?
So it's half a check. Third of a check.
Third of a check. So 4 and 8 are not funded in your recommended budget?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And that would include, may I ask, along
Mr.
the
Shannon, go
same
ahead.
lines, thank you, Tim. There were 21, I believe, we were initially maybe proposed to the budget for ALS. I mean, in my 20.
Yeah, that's
it's not
stations
21.
1, 4, and 8.
1, 4, and 8, and that was a total of, I believe, 21 ALS, additional 21 ALS.
Mm-hmm.
And to this, to us, that is a top priority as far as I'm concerned, because
Right.
it is.
So look at slide 26.
Uh-huh.
Adding 4 and 8. Staffing for 1 is in the recommended.
Right.
Adding 4 and 8 are
Is it around a half a penny,
for half a penny together. Yeah, about
56.
just over a quarter of a penny each.
quarter penny each? Okay.
In fact, I want to point out, while we're back in that section, if you look at slide 28.
He's got it.
Okay. All of the requests, the top red of the 2 red lines, total requests beyond the equalized rate are 0.0315, okay? Current tax rate is 85 cents. The equalized rate is 81.64. 81.64 plus the 0315 is 84.79.
82.
8479. 84.79 cents.
Mr. Chair, back to one other follow-up there. On slide, we'll call it 20, I guess. Hey, I just want to make sure, I thought we went over this once before, the right turn lane onto Lansdowne Road off of Route 2. I thought we determined that was the city.
No, it's a combination of our road and their road.
So I guess, well, that was a determination that came up there at FAMPO and stuff, that was a city project, correct? And they were going to put money into Smart Scale for that, right? So I think we need to make sure, verify that before we allocate funding for it. Maybe there may be some shared work in the future, but my understanding, that's a city, that's the city. Yeah, I just want to make sure on that one, okay?
Mr. Skinner?
Just be concerned that when you do a smart scale project, you're looking at 8 years down the road, roughly nowadays.
Oh, I understand, but there's $1 million in 19 funding allocated for that. That's why I want to make sure.
Well, and what I'm saying is between that amount and the city's amount, that could be done within, I guess, from what plan tells me, a year to year and a half.
I'm not arguing, I just don't know that we're going to spend the county's money. That's a bigger decision to spend the county's money in the city, right?
No, tell you what, the majority of that road is covered in the county ourselves.
No, I'm not disagreeing right now, but that may be something that FAMPO should fund with some of the regional funding, not, yeah, okay.
I understand that then.
Anybody else? Mr. Yakubowski.
Thanks. A quick question. Last year, ongoing school funding was how much? Because we had a one-time of 333. And when I get, and what I'm getting at is that that ongoing was 2 million or so, maybe, I'm guessing, but you'll give me the correct amount. And that was with a decrease in population, but as we've seen this school year that they're, with the budget that they're currently operating under, they've had an increase in population. And so I'm wondering, are they projecting another increase in population, or was that an anomaly, what happened this year?
I can answer the piece about the funding.
Okay.
The ongoing funding in fiscal year 18's adopted budget was $123.7 million. The ongoing funding planned in the recommended budget tonight is $126.7 million.
So in the current budget that we're operating under, that was an increase from the previous year of how much? I'm asking, what was their increase last year versus their increase this year? If you can get back to me, that's fine. That's no big deal. I'm just wondering are they looking for increases in population again this year or not? So if we can ask that question.
So you're looking for the delta from 17 to 18 and then 18 to recommended?
Right. How much was the transfer last year versus transfer this year?
Right.
Of ongoing dollars.
Right.
The other thing to bring up is the transportation transfer and correct me if I'm not understanding it right. This year, you're only recommending 700,000 to go in there, and next year, we're going to need 1.8 million. So if we were to soften that a little bit and maybe put in $1 million, it would sort of even it out year to year, so it's not so drastic. That's something to consider also. The point, to go back to what Mr. Skinner was talking about, of all new dollars that came up per budget was roughly 2/3 went to the schools. I don't recall, or was it including CIP and operating, or was it just operating? Because there was never a direct agreement, but it was always sort of an understanding. And correct me if I'm wrong, it was 2/3 because the CIP for them was increasing so fast, so we threw it all together and said 2/3, and as opposed to breaking up operational and CIP many years ago, not any time recent.
Originally, it was 51% plus debt service, whatever the debt service was. Whatever schools were approved, we funded 100% of the debt service, plus we gave 51% of undesignated revenue. There are always designated revenues in this budget that cannot go to the schools. We get compensation, comp board funding, we get grant funding, but those things that were not designated, 51% went plus 100% of any debt service. Then later it was changed. We looked at that number, we trended it out, and determined that it was in the 67% range, and we combined it together and said it'll just be a flat percentage. It will not be operation and debt service. So you are correct.
Okay.
That change did occur, yes.
Okay. And in that time, though, since that 67%, the undesignated monies that the county deals with have actually, we've increased capacity on those in the forms of different set-asides that we do. OPEB is one, for example. The spillover fund, I always forget what that acronym is, that we just.
Fiscal Stability Reserve?
Yes.
Yes.
That is another one, plus going from our 10 or 11% set aside of the big one. All of that kind of stuff depletes that new monies that shows up by categorizing that as designated.
Yes.
So what it actually is doing is shrinking the pie, so you will get 50 or 67% of new monies, but those new monies over the time actually have depleted.
Yeah, one of the larger ones that we've added is the fiscal reserve policy that says we will transfer a certain percentage of our revenue to cash fund projects.
Right.
And that's been increasing every year. That's one example of that type of thing.
Okay.
And if you'll recall, it hasn't been in the last 2 years, but I think it was 3 or 4 years ago where there may not have been additional local transfer money to the schools, but the schools actually gained local operational spending money because their debt service was decreasing. Because
Right.
we have not been building schools. They have been paying off that debt service for those schools that have been built for years past. And so there were years where I believe it was multiple millions of dollars that they did not need to get additional money from the county to make that happen. Their debt service bill went down, so they gained that ability to spend that money on their operational side. So
Right.
that, again, addresses your point where the debt service has not been increasing the way it was 10 years ago when we did. I mean, I remember CIPs, 5-year CIPs that had 2 elementary, a middle school, and a high school in every 5-year CIP. That was a standard practice. And so this conversation is, this group will tell you, dear to my heart, because I remember those days when those huge CIPs drove a lot of our costs. And when I see these population numbers and the school capacities, it is in the forefront of my mind that has got to be happening again soon.
Well, and drove is a very important word in that sentence because it comes a place where it is not a matter of choice to fund the construction.
Right, and that, I think, is my overall point, is that over the years, recession and other reasons have led to a depletion of a transfer to the schools as overall dollars.
Yes.
Because of debt coming out, because of set-asides that we do. And the operating for them has continued, their debt has been reduced. But now, as we're looking at more students coming in, we're looking at growth that's going to be coming in with thousands of homes and units that have been approved. They will be built. And as they are built, we don't know exactly what the number of children that will come from these, because the discussions with apartments nowadays and less children, all that kind of stuff. So it's hard to predict. But the fact that the debt portion of that has been small, I think it for me is a bit of concern, because once that kicks in, as Mr. Taylor said, you can't not do it, and you have to find the money for it. And so any way that we can prepare ourselves for that, the better off I think that we will be, just like it with the transportation. Transportation, 1.8 million transfers from general fund. These are monies that could, if the county wasn't doing road improvements, could go to other parts of the budget, schools included. But since now the county has been doing road improvements for 15 years or so, that is money now that pays for debt service in a different part of the budget than what it used to. So that's something to keep in mind too. And on that, I had a question. Would it be, and maybe this is more theory than or philosophical than anything, would it be better to designate a revenue stream for that, for those general funds? I know we have the transportation fund, but would it be beneficial to designate a revenue stream that we currently have that we know will be going into the transportation fund that doesn't currently do that, as opposed to just picking out of the general fund, here's $1.8 million, here's $1 million, whatever. We kind of have a better understanding of what we're looking at year after year. So it's just a question. We can discuss that later on, but something I had thought about. Thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. Ross?
So, I know I always ask you this, but how comfortable are you with the tightening of your budget forecasts? Are there any concerns?
You want to speak to it?
Sure.
We've discussed it a lot.
Mary and I
Sure.
have gone round and round on this.
Sure.
They called me
Who won?
abusive.
Oh, there's never winning
I
here.
know.
No, yeah.
So we have gotten to a point where we're comfortable with this, I think. Does it mean for certain that we know that we're going to have that savings? We do not. Do we feel like we can manage to this? We do, but it's going to mean managing more frequently, and I say that without meaning that we're lax now. We're not. It means heavier-handed managing, and a lot of assistance from the departments. We already get a lot of assistance from them, but even more so communication with them on a regular basis. I feel most comfortable on the revenue side with the projections that we've altered. I feel comfortable on the expense side as well, although not to the extent that I do on the revenue side. We have, like Mark said, we have modified the budget to reflect a savings on lapse and turnover, which is real that we've experienced in prior years. We've also assumed a savings on our health insurance budget, and that is not our health insurance plan, but it is our health insurance budget. And I know I'm not going to try to distinguish for all of you the difference there, but there is a difference, and we feel because of the lapse and turnover savings, there's also a corresponding health insurance budget savings.
I think it's important to be aware, to bear in mind with the projections that revenue comes to us from an array of categories. Expenditures go out in an array of categories. And as it happens, over the last 2 fiscal years, we have had revenues come in higher than projected in a majority, all but 1 or 2 of categories, and expenditures be lower than projected in most categories. And so we've been very fortunate. So I think the staff has been very conservative and prudent with adjusting the projections. I remain hopeful that we will continue in a positive overall performance.
Okay. All right, thank you. Slide 10, am I reading that right? The $8 million, is that for the social services building? Oh, did we make a decision on actually building that building? I don't remember doing that, but.
Not a decision, Mr. Ross, per se. There was a
But
consistently expressed.
Is that $8 million all for fiscal year 19?
It's not all in fiscal year 19. It's programmed over multiple fiscal years, and Bonnie's finding it here.
There's 1.2 million in fiscal year 19, followed by 4 million approximately in 2020 and 2021.
Okay. I would just ask staff to look at other spaces. I was talking to Ed the other day about the Merchant Square building, the first floor, and I know we have some storage spaces. And talking to Mr. McLaughlin the other day about maybe even leasing or renting some available commercial space for much less. Just some other options along those lines. And then slide 12. What's driving the increase, the $541,000 in maintenance service contract increase?
The maintenance service contracts are primarily in information services. They're multi-year contracts, and this is the expenditure set for FY19.
But that's an increase, right? Is that
right? That's an increase.
Let me add just a little, and this is my understanding from talking with the IS folks. We have, in some instances, multi-year contracts, and fiscal year 19 is the year that a number of those come due. So for, let's say, 2 to 3 years, we don't have that expense. Then in the year that it comes due, the cost goes up. Then again, for 2 more years, we don't have that expense. Then the 3rd year, the cost goes up.
So we actually pay the full multi-year contract price in 1 year, and then
yes, yes.
Okay. Do we get a savings on that? I would hope we do.
my understanding that we do, but here comes Jane.
She's leaving.
Smart lady.
Out the door she goes.
That the board is, and the public is clear that when we do those multi-year contracts, we receive substantial contract savings.
Okay.
We do pay them up front, but it is for long-term software applications, hardware and such, and it does save the county substantial money to do so.
Okay.
Thank you.
I saw the Harrison Community Centers, Harrison Road is not replacement, but is that money that we receive from VDOT still earmarked for that? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
The animal shelter scope change, that looked like it was funded, and that's another thing that I don't think our board's looked at. How much is that? Do you know?
Oh, no, the board did review and give a vote and
Okay, we
direction
did,
on that.
because I thought there was
and
another scope change after that. And
There
so-
was discussion of a cost increase based on estimates received, but that did not.
So that's not part of this. I'm just making sure, I know the board voted on one. If that's what this is, I'm good, but if it's not what this is.
The board voted on the additional 1 million, but the cost of that project has gone up since the project started. We're coming to the board, the next board meeting, to go over capital projects.
So is that gone up
That'll be part
in
of
this?
the presentation.
Is that-
Yes.
that is-
It's not, it's included in the CIP, but it's not here. Is it, Bonnie?
It's funded in this
It is.
proposal.
It's funded in here.
So that check mark is part of the go up from what we are, in addition to the 1.1 we voted on.
Right.
Do you know what in addition to the 1.1 that is?
I think it's roughly $2 million.
Oh.
Yeah, actually, I have the totals here. We are over the 5-year planning period, adding 3.2 million to the project.
Just to make sure I understand it right, the board voted for the animal shelter, then we voted for a $1.1 million increase, and now what's actually checked as funded is an additional 2 million on top of that. Ed, is that?
That's correct.
Okay. And we haven't voted on that yet.
You have not.
But it's checked in the checkbox.
It is checked on the
Okay.
checkbox.
Okay.
You approved the project originally.
Sure.
It had a cost. You approved a scope change that at the time was expected to cost 1.1 million. The combination of the original project and what was expected to cost 1.1 million is now a combined $7 million.
And when is that that additional 2 million, when's that come before the board?
With the CIP, right?
It's part of the CIP.
Okay. And then the last thing I have, just for the audience, I saw a lot of people taking a picture of the dollar sign, or the dollar slide. And if you Google Spotsylvania County fiscal year 19 budget, this whole brief's out there, and you can download to your PC. That's all I have.
Anybody else? Mr. Skinner, sorry.
Last, get my phone on here, thank you. Contribution to jail and juvenile, is that an increase of $536,000?
It's actually an increase of $770,000 in our jail contribution, and a decrease in our share of the cost of the juvenile detention center.
Okay, so my question
So
is.
it's a net increase.
But it's a based on our occupancy of
Yes, sir.
Spotsylvania personnel that go to that jail?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so just a quick question. Can we find out why? It would seem to me that we've got a lot of people that being arrested. What is it? Drugs? Is it murder? To me, what's the sheriff doing to help decrease the crime in the county? I think you should know that, so that this should probably go down, could go down. And I know he does a good job with drugs. I know that's one of the top priorities and stuff of that. But what we're saying is basically we're having an increase in crime with that $536,000 increase because we're putting more people in jail.
I'm unpersuaded, Mr. Skinner, that that's the right conclusion to draw from these numbers.
Well, then what would we draw?
Well, I think that because our share in the operation of the jail is based on our census of arrestees or convictees from Spotsylvania housed at the jail. So one of Mr. Byrd's commitments as a Commonwealth's attorney when he was campaigning for that office was to persist, be trial and conviction oriented the process requires time. One of the things that I've asked for information on, I'm trying to learn more about this and will report detail as I get it, is I'm not sure to what degree our greater number of inmate bed days in the jail is simply the consequence of inmates being held over for trial, not making bail, delays in their paperwork processing for whatever reason. There are system costs that are system elements that create inmate bed days. Some of those we may be able to improve on by changing some processes. I don't know. But we're looking at that because, in fact, our share based on the agreement was originally increasing by more than $1 million at the jail. We worked with the Jail Finance Committee for some creative solutions to pare that back to around $750,000, and we're still looking to understand the root or causes of that impact and to see what we can do to change out years. But I think that I'm concerned or apprehensive that there may be process elements that have more to do with our inmate bed days stats, if you will, than the notion that there is a crime wave of some sort. I don't think the latter is the case. I think it's more of an operational issue that we need to dig into.
Well, as you find that, I would
Yes, sir.
appreciate, I think we all would appreciate
Absolutely.
why that has gone up, and I can see what you're saying as far as the operation and new Commonwealth attorney and stuff of that nature. But, and I know the sheriff, this isn't a down on the sheriff, I mean, because he's very dedicated to keeping crime low here, but I think it's important, when you look at that increase, sort of figure out why we got there. And,
Oh, no, absolutely.
and that's my whole purpose there.
It's a matter of great concern. At one level, the inmate bed day stat is an indicator that the bad guys are in the right place, and I think we all sleep better knowing that, but at the same time, understanding what operational underpinnings may go with that we can control or adjust in order to manage that cost, I think is very important also.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I'll just say just a couple things real quick. As far as the funding for fire and rescue for 4 and 8, I'm sure maybe Mr. Marshall and I are probably more in tune to that than most, but I'm 100% for doing all 3 stations, absolutely, for the ALS coverage. I think that it's an insult to this community that we have 3 stations that don't always provide 24/7 ALS service. So, yes, Mr. Dillon.
Mr. Chairman, could I, with the board's indulgence, could I ask Chief Cullinan to step up to the podium and explain in ordinary terms, just for our citizens and for all of us, what ALS really means in practical terms? What services are we talking about delivering with those people in the community? Chief?
Okay. So for those who haven't been through this before, so advanced life support care is we basically have 2 levels of care. We've got a basic life support care, which is our what had been EMT basic, and advanced life support care, which is either EMT intermediate or paramedic. One of the additional costs that you saw in that budget presentation was one that was shifted to us from the state, where Virginia is doing away with the intermediate certification, and we're having to take everyone to paramedic for that base level of advanced life support care. So advanced life support differs from basic life support because it builds on top of that. The basis for all care is that basic life support, but the advanced life support provides the capability to administer fluids, administer a variety of medications, do heart monitoring, do advanced airways and other procedures such as that, as well as provide a lot more basis and education for why a patient is going down a certain pathway and certain treatment regimen.
So if I have a heart attack working on this budget, what do I need?
You need initial good BLS, but followed up by ALS care, yes.
That's like BLS, you're going to get oxygen and some CPR.
Okay.
And ALS, you're going to get a lot of medications and monitoring and You know, as an EMT basic, I could look at the machine every now and then and see the squigglies and say, "Ooh, now that one's bad." But most of the time, I had not a clue.
And you could use the AED.
I could use the AED.
Right. But for definitive care.
Your level of care is very, very, very limited with the
Right.
basic.
And in working up this recommended budget, the disparity in service to different areas in our county was of considerable concern to us. It's a matter of what could fit in the recommendation and what we can look ahead to in the out years. And I'm hopeful that that is one of the costs specifically identified. And Mr. Skinner, I think, pulled them together. It's just over half of a penny on the real estate rate would make the difference in those other stations for ALS.
Well, I just wanted to make it, I'm 100% will support all three of those stations being ALS. And that's some of the most populous areas that we have, especially in For's area. I think it's critical to have that coverage. Also, it keeps some of the other stations in their districts instead of having to pull them for ALS assists when you don't have that ALS advanced life support or care. Social services building, I will 100% support. I've been in that building too much to see the overcrowding. I don't think there's any way to remedy that with the Merchant Square. I know some other buildings have been mentioned. I know Catholic school, but in looking at that's even smaller than Merchant Square. And I don't know how many millions we want to do for an addition there and it's just too much. And I also think for their safety and everything like that, it's critical that they're going to be next to the sheriff's office where they do daily work together, at least almost daily. And this is just Greg's opinions as it is right now. I did not see where, I had asked for a health care study or health care study where we could have a third-party advisor and looking between the schools and the county. I don't think we can keep on going the directions with health care that we're going in either division. And I think it's going to be critical to make these, at some point, either changes in one or the other. We just can't keep on with the spending that we're doing. One wants to be the same as the other. I know there's some differences to an extent, but at some point, we can't just keep on every year, millions and millions and millions more. And I'll just leave it like that for now. But I appreciate it, Mr. Taylor. I'm sure you will be getting a lot of emails and calls and suggestions for the various board members here. So it's going to be interesting for Thursday to hear the school's actual presentation. I really hope they're going to do some sort of presentation with the Evergreen study for themselves, which I've read through it to a degree, as much as I could understand it for myself, but we've never had a presentation from the schools themselves on their study. So that's it. I guess we're at recess now. And I'm sorry.
One thing,
Mr.
if I
Marshall.
could, while we had the fire chief here, Mr. Taylor, we had a town hall meeting that we had about 24/7 coverage for the ALS at 1, 4, and 8. During that meeting, there was no mention of the 24/5 staffing. There's 3 positions here. Can we get some clarification? That would probably prevent a lot of emails that could come from this slide.
Absolutely. The 24/5 was a schedule adjustment we were originally looking at doing based upon continued discussions with the volunteer leadership and, again, following with the town hall meeting. We've decided to go down a different pathway. We will still need those positions, but it will not be focused on 24/5. It will be to continue to fulfill that effort to move to 24/7.
Just want to clarify, there's no 24/5 staffing, will be 24/7 staffing.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Chief, if you would send me an email suggesting an adjustment to the title of that line item, we'll correct the language and avoid confusion.
According to me, I'll show that we recess to closed session. Oh, I'm sorry.
We do have
Is it
public
hearing?
hearings.
I'm sorry.
and public comment scheduled for 6:30, for which we are late,
already.
however, with the number of schools, people, and others here wanting to hear the budget.
I'll tell you what.
Move to presentations.
Yeah. Would y'all, let's take a 5-minute recess, 'cause,
Thank you, Mr.
all
Chairman.
right, 5-minute recess. We really have public presentations again.
Amy, has anyone signed up to speak at 6:30?
Yes, sir.
Please.
The first citizen signed up to speak is Catherine Palmer, followed by Anthony LaFaro.
You come to the podium, please state your name and your voting district. And speaking individually, you'll have 3 minutes. On behalf of a group, 5 minutes. The yellow light comes on and you have 30 seconds to sum up. When the light turns red, the mic goes off.
Good evening. My name is Catherine Palmer, and I reside in the Lee Hill District. I'm here tonight on behalf of Rappahannock United Way, so I'm hoping for 5 minutes. As we begin to negotiate the county budget, I wanted to come out tonight as someone who lives, works, and pays taxes in Spotsylvania to express my support for budget dollars that are allocated to local nonprofits. Last fall, I heard a citizen speak out against the use of tax dollars for charity. I feel that I'm in a unique position to address this concern, both as a taxpayer and as someone who has worked for a local nonprofit for 5 years. In my role as Community Impact Manager for United Way, I evaluate grant applications from local nonprofits focused on education, financial stability, and healthy living. In order to receive a grant from us, a program must be working in one of these areas to help people become financially stable and, wherever possible, to move out of poverty. These programs address the root causes of many of the challenges facing our community. Most of our member agencies seek funding from the county as well for the work they do right here in Spotsylvania. Full disclosure, United Way has applied for locality funding in support of our free tax prep program, which last year saved Spotsylvania citizens nearly $150,000 in preparation fees alone, and more than $600,000 to county residents in the form of refunds and credits, much of which I assume is spent right here in our county. However, I'm actually here in support of all local nonprofits that seek and receive county funding, even those that I might not personally choose to donate to. This is not a donation to charity. This is an investment in the service landscape of our county. Grant funding for these programs last year represented about 1.6% of the county general fund. I'm an average real estate taxpayer here in the county, and I figure my percentage, the percentage of my taxes that go to support these programs is about $30. For that $30, myself and all county residents get access to programs and services like Empower House, Habitat for Humanity, Legal Aid Works, Mental Health America of Fredericksburg, MICA, the Agency on Aging, the Community Services Board, court-appointed special advocates, healthy families, big brothers, big sisters, it's a long list, Lois Ann's Hope House, Safe Harbor, and the Thurman Brisbane Center. In my role at United Way, I visited funded programs at all of these agencies during January, and I can tell you firsthand, the need is great, and the work that these and other agencies do is essential. These agencies supplement and support our social services department, our schools, and our sheriff's department. I'm proud as a taxpayer to have a small portion of my tax dollars assigned to support the great work being done by these agencies. I understand that county grants are often leveraged by these nonprofits to secure other funding sources that bring revenue into our county. I understand that as a community, when we join together and supported these agencies, we have a greater impact on their capacity to serve our citizens. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you as a citizen and on behalf of Rappahannock United Way for your continued support of citizen services and regional agencies. Thank you.
Anthony LaFaro.
Anthony LaFaro, Chancellor District. I wanted to come out and express my concerns for the funding gap in the public schools. Currently, I think we're 82nd out of 130 in terms of amount of funding we put per pupil into our school system, even though our median household income is $10,000 above average. The 60 positions that the superintendent's budget added to this year's budget only covers half the really needed positions that they need, many of which go to support students with disabilities. And yet we're still left with a gap, even in spite of the Evergreen study, which I know a lot of educators and school employees are grateful for, but some, with the rising healthcare costs, as have been mentioned tonight, may not see a net pay increase. I think it's time this board starts to get more serious about closing these funding gaps year to year with the school board budget and not doing it with one-time funds that leaves us figuring it out again the following year. I'm also dumbfounded how every year we're focused on only the real estate tax rate, which is already one of the lowest in the state, while our personal property tax rate, even after you've lowered it little by little, continues to be one of the highest in the state. I mean, I drove here in a 15-year-old car, so it doesn't affect me that much, but at a certain point, it might, especially with a lot of commuters in this area. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was claims by some of these members when people were nominated for committees of ethics violations by those individuals, unfounded claims in which you, by making unfounded claims, I'm holding the code of ethics in front of me, you violated those ethical codes by making those claims without giving details. I could go on a long list of code of ethics violations by those specific individuals if I really wanted to tonight. In the name of keeping peace and civility, I will not. But they were clearly only directed, and all the nominations I've seen, about people who are associated with education, and what is obviously a continuation of this 2-year-long war on the school board. It is time for those members of this board to start acting like adults and end this ridiculous war, which is really just a war on our kids. And honestly, with the fluoride, what a waste of time. I mean, I think we need to focus on more important things like the little gnomes that keep taking my socks, because really, that's how ridiculous you sound at some of you.
The other citizens that have signed up to speak are speaking about Spring Arbor, which is actually a public hearing. So there are no other citizens signed up to speak under public presentations.
All right.
Thank you. That brings us to the public hearing, R17-0006. Timber Greneau, M. Clay Dickinson, and Braver LLC, Spring Arbor. H.H. Hunt Corporation is in the Cortland District.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a request to rezone 4 acres from residential 1 to commercial 2 with proffers to allow for a 30,000 square foot memory care assisted living facility and an up to 8,000 square foot retail commercial multi-tenant pad site. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on December 6, 2017 and unanimously voted to recommend the rezoning with the proffer statement that's included in your packet this evening. Staff also recommends approval with the proffer statement and recommends the board adopt the attached ordinance to approve the zoning request. The property is located at the corner of Bragg and River Road. The 2 parcels are highlighted here in red. This first map on the left is a zoning map identifying the property as residential 1, which is consistent with the larger area, except immediately adjacent, which is the Spring Arbor development, which is fairly recently zoned to PDH 4. North of the site, across River Road, is a multi-family development within this Fredericksburg city limits. Immediately south of the site is the Church of Latter-day Saints, and more residential development further to the south. So residential development here on the east side of Bragg Road, and there are some commercial uses that have popped up along the southern end of Bragg Road near Plank. Directly adjacent to the west is the Spring Arbor development. Spring Arbor was approved in 2009 as a Planned Development Housing District 4. There were 30 age-restricted attached units, 33 age-restricted detached lots, and the memory care facility. as a secondary use. The existing Spring Arbor Memory Care Facility has 100 beds, and it's staff's understanding that they're over 95% occupied. The applicants indicated there's a strong market demand for these assisted living memory care units, and that's what's driving their request before you this evening. Here's the generalized development plan, which shows the 30,000 square foot memory care facility. This will have up to 48 beds. And then also the 8,000 square foot multi-tenant building with the pad site right here on the corner. Access to the site will be provided by a right-in, right-out along Bragg Road with a right turn taper. A second point of access will be through an internal connection to Spring Arbor Lane. Spring Arbor Lane goes through the Spring Arbor development and goes back out to River Road. There will be landscaping along both Bragg and River Road frontages, and sidewalks will be extended from within the development to connect to the existing sidewalks on Bragg Road. The proposed development will generate approximately 410 trips a day, with between 60 and 65 of those being during the peak hour. The peak period level of service for Bragg Road currently is a level B. The peak level of service for River Road and for River Road is at an F currently. Now, VDOT did recently make some safety improvements to River Road, and this is a wider segment of River Road in this location. And you may recall with the Spring Arbor development, when it was approved, they installed a right turn lane and also a left turn lane. Now, that left turn lane was a proffered improvement. It was above and beyond what was required. So it's important to note that those improvements are already in place, and the proposed development, the traffic that's going to be generated, it's not expected to degrade the level of service. The improvements are expected to accommodate. Given that the commercial proposal is limited to a multi-tenant building with a maximum of 8,000 square feet, the new traffic is expected to be accommodated with those existing improvements, like I just mentioned. Approximately 80% of the traffic is going to be using this Bragg Road right in, right out. So it's only a minor amount that's actually going to go out to River Road and utilize that access. The project area and the surroundings are documented by VDHR as land associated with the Salem battlefield, Salem Church battlefield, and of course River Road is designated as a scenic byway, but given that the surrounding area has already been developed and what's occurred there already, the historic context has been altered to a great extent. The applicant did conduct a community meeting in April of 2017. At that meeting, citizens raised concerns about traffic and also the unknown about the commercial pad site, what was going to be there. Staff shared those concerns, and the applicant did work with staff to limit the size of the commercial pad site, limit uses, and I think at this point staff agrees that they've really limited those concerns now, or addressed those to the extent they can. This area is designated on the future land use map as low-density residential, but we know that commercial development has popped up on the southern end of Bragg. There's the church, there's multifamily development, there's the assisted living facility currently, so those low-intense uses are there, and so with what the conditions that the applicant has put forth, that I'll go into greater detail on the next slide, we think that this has become an appropriate scale and intensity of project. The proffers within your packet this evening, dated November 14th, 2017, they include development in conformance with the GDP that we just presented. The applicant has proffered conditions to the commercial pad site, which one, limit the size to a maximum of 8,000 square feet, and also the building must be a multi-tenant building. They've also limited the number of permitted uses on the property. 23 of the permitted C2 uses have been proffered out. There's 19 permitted uses which remain. They include things such as retail sales, eating establishments, offices, personal service establishments, just to name a few. The result of this proffered language is that you're not going to see a freestanding convenience store or a freestanding restaurant located on this corner. And given the future land use designation and the existing development, staff did not feel that would be appropriate, but the multi-tenant business or retail pad site will control that scale and intensity of uses. The applicant has proffered architectural renderings for the assisted living facility and design criteria for the multi-tenant building. This is the rendering for the memory care facility. You'll see a black standing seam metal roof, vinyl siding, cream and green colored, and black architectural shingles. This will be the rendering for the memory care facility, and the design language that's been proffered for the commercial pad site, it mimics the county's design standards for properties within the HCOD, the Highway Corridor Overlay District. The applicant is proffering right-of-way dedication along Bragg Road and Spring Arbor Lane. This will accommodate their road improvements and also that connection to Spring Arbor Lane. And also proffered to create and record a declaration of covenants and restrictions to protect the property value and ensure the maintenance and ongoing maintenance of the common area to be owned by the Property Owners Association. Key findings in favor of the request. While the commercial component of the project is not consistent with the low-density residential land use designation, a single-family residential development would not be appropriate on this corner, given the size of the property, the shape, and its proximity to that busy intersection. Given the adjacent existing Spring Arbor facility and the adjacent church to the south, the site is bookended by uses that create an appropriate location for a commercial development. The applicant has proffered limited uses and design criteria for the multi-tenant building, as well as the memory care facility to ensure that the site is developed to be compatible with the surrounding development, including both scale and intensity. The proposed development will result in an increase in real estate property tax and an increase in business services. Findings against: the project is located within the low-density residential land use designation, and a commercial component is not consistent with all of those policies and goals with that land use. While the applicant has proffered limited uses and design criteria for the multi-tenant building, there still is a certain level of uncertainty related to that commercial pad site. And although the south end of Bragg Road has begun to transition with more intense commercial uses, to date, the north end is developing with less intensity. So there is a concern that a speculative commercial zoning on this corner could trigger an introduction of more intense commercial uses on this end, this north end of Bragg Road. That does conclude my presentation. Again, Planning Commission staff are recommending approval, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Ross?
So you said River Road is already at F? Because, and so what does that mean?
At peak hour, it's operating at a level of service F.
And how does that work? I mean, there's no traffic lights on River Road, and I know...
It's
I mean,
at that intersection.
just at the intersection?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what does that mean? Every time I've been on that, I think there's a light that, and I don't know if it's all the time, but if you're coming out, it turns automatically. It's triggered by a vehicle. So would that be Bragg that's at, but you said Bragg is a higher level than River Road. So does River Road back up at peak hours? Would that be in the morning?
It must. Because
in the evening, it would be movement the other way.
I don't have the TIA with me, but the engineer is here for the applicant, and maybe they can speak
Okay.
to what's triggering that level of service.
And then you said that most of the residential concerns were addressed about the commercial and traffic. I heard you talk about the commercial, so there's not going to be fast food or it'll be low impact, but were there concerns all addressed? I mean,
I think the concern was a convenience store going to be there?
Sure.
You know, what kind of user was going to be there?
Gotcha.
Would it be a more intense user? Would it triggering more traffic on that intersection, which is already very
Gotcha.
busy?
And then one of your comments was about commercial use in the northern part of Bragg Road there. There's really not any other places to develop a commercial property on Bragg, so why would that be something against it?
No, sir, there's residential houses right there, but it's reasonable to expect they could convert.
I see. Okay. That's all I've got.
Any other questions from the board? Do we have the applicant?
Mr. Chairman and other members of the Board of Supervisors, my name is Charlie Painthal from Herschel Fleischer and represent the applicant. It's a pleasure to see you this evening. Happy New Year. I think this is the first time I've been before the board this new year. It's always good to see you. It's always good to be in Spotsylvania County. Mr. Marshall, welcome to the Board of Supervisors. Appreciate staff's presentation and their due diligence during this entire process. As staff noted, this started almost a year ago with a community meeting and obviously reaching out to the community and obviously going through the application process and through the Planning Commission back in November and of course now here before the board this month. I do have a PowerPoint presentation that Kimberly will assist me with in pressing forward. As staff had noted, this site does consist of 2 parcels. It totals about 4 acres. You're probably very familiar with the site at the intersection of Bragg and River Road. There's currently assisted living facility to our west, of course, River Road to our north, Bragg Road to our south, and Bragg Road to our, Bragg Road to our, I just got completely lost. Bragg Road to our east, I apologize. Currently, there's a Spring Arbor 1 assisted living facility, which is immediately adjacent to us, as I had stated. This is a natural expansion of that facility. That facility is almost at full capacity today. That's what's driving a lot of this. Obviously, that corner, the highest and best use for this particular site is, in my opinion, for this particular use. And obviously, with this use and having that corner isolated like it is, residential simply would not make a whole lot of sense there. What would make sense, in our opinion, would be a commercial pad site, probably likely a commercial office, professional office location. It won't be one big box of 8,000 square feet. We have agreed to make it multi-tenant, which will break it up so you wouldn't have fast food, you wouldn't have a large CVS, you wouldn't have anything with a drive-through, et cetera, at that site. I think it's also important to note for purposes of this site, most of our trips, over 80% of our trips, are going to be right in, right out off of Bragg Road. Anyone going to that site is not going to want to go down River Road to come into the site. It's just not as quickly accessible. There may be some who want to come back out Spring Arbor Lane to take a left at the light, but we don't see that being a consistent activity. So I just wanted to point those 2 key pieces out. As we had stated, the property is being proposed for a C2 rezoning. Under your zoning ordinance, C2 is to provide for general commercial activity in the county, which does allow assisted living as one of those by right uses to meet local and regional commercial needs at a medium intensity. Without a doubt, assisted living is something that's a deficit in the entire region. It's a deficit in this county. What we'd like to do is obviously not only provide assistance to those in need, but keep them in place, keep them in Spotsylvania County, keep them in their region so they're not being relocated somewhere else, so their families can be with them here in the area. So to me, that's a really important community need. And again, if you take a look at what we're proposing here from a floor area ratio, from a commercial component, under C2, we're allowed to do 0.70 FAR, which is fairly intense. What we're doing is a little more than half of that between 2 buildings. So again, we're focusing on making this low to medium intensity, obviously out of the concerns for not only for our neighbors, but also for what's practical for that corner and for the assisted living use. We don't want a lot of activity around the assisted living uses that we have at the site. The new facility will have up to 48 beds. And again, the pad site will be 8,000 square feet, multi-tenant. Just to even further demonstrate the lower intensity of this project, we are proposing at least 30% and 39% open space to buffer around our neighbors, which a minimum under C2 is 15. So just again, just reiterating that point of lower intensity. The project will be completed, we hope, in 2 years if this is approved this evening, again, to meet the needs of what the market is and of the community. Next slide. As I got lost a little while ago, you would think being born and raised here and your family's been here since the 1700s, I wouldn't get lost on Bragg Road, but I did. We are located just to the south of the intersection of River and Bragg Road. Just to the immediate south of us is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Again, adjacent to us is not per se residential. Immediately to our west is, again, the assisted living facility, and east Bragg Road and North River Road. And further to the north is larger commercial centers, shopping centers, as you're well aware, Central Park and Wegmans. And further to our south is the Spotsylvania County Town Center and Route 3. Next slide. There are no cultural resources or wetlands or environmental sensitive sites, sensitive locations on the site as well, and it's not in the Historic Overlay District. Next slide. For purposes of the comp plan, you heard staff report that this isn't a PDH 4, but for the highest and best use, we believe this proposal is that. We do it, and it does conform to many of the attributes of the comprehensive plan. Again, being adjacent to Spring Arbor 1, this is a natural expansion. The assisting, again, I have stated earlier that we have a 96% capacity rate currently there, so there's a need for expansion. And the proposed commercial use is, again, the highest and best use. It certainly would not be feasible for a residential use at that corner. Next slide, please. The project will improve Bragg Road in this area. I know there's been some discussion about the Bragg Road conditions. We will be able to provide an additional 2,517 square feet of right-of-way along Bragg Road. Again, the improvements with the right-in, right-out with the taper will provide those improvements and have very little to any impact to that area. We were not required to provide a transportation impact analysis by the county or VDOT because it's a low-impact project, and it didn't rise to that level, so that's why there isn't one. We did not study the level of services at the intersection of Bragg and River, but with the improvements that Spring Arbor 1 made at that site, I know just from being at that location that the traffic flow is much better, especially with the left turn lane into Spring Arbor. But again, most of the trips are going to be coming right in, right out off of Bragg Road. This also furthers multiple objectives. We're in budget season. What's always good to have is commercial investment into the county that generates positive net income. This project will do that, about $140,000 net at full build-out. It will also create, and this is just for the assisted living facility, will create about 40 full-time jobs. Now, you're talking about nurses and nurses practitioners, assistants, professional health care personnel. The average salary is about $65,000 a year. The total investment of this project is close to $10 million if you just for the assisted living facility alone. The property is also located within your primary development area, which encourages greater intensity. Just talked a little bit about transportation. Access, again, would be from Bragg Road and also Spring Arbor Lane. The roads construction of the project will be privately maintained. That's just those that are contained within this site. Most of Spring Arbor Lane is public. Traffic activity, just so we kind of understand this a little bit, the traffic activity is 56 vehicles per day during the AM peak hours and 50 during the day at PM. Now, this is max build-out. This isn't just for the assisted living facility. And what the models don't take into account is assisted living facilities, the employees are usually the greatest generator of the traffic, and they come in not during peak hours. They have 3 shifts, and they come in during non-peak hours. We don't want them coming in during peak hours because we want them to be at work on time. So that is not taken into account in any of the models, unfortunately. Next slide, please. You've seen the GDP. You'll see the right in, right out access off of Bragg Road and the connection to Spring Arbor Lane there to the west. You'll also see the extensive buffering around the site and the commercial pad site being literally right at that corner. Next slide, please, as I'm running out of slide. I don't want to get in trouble with the new chairman. Public facilities, again, Fire and Rescue Station 6 is located about 1.8 miles from the site. As many of you may know, assisted living facilities have 24/7 care. So this actually reduces the number of calls that are necessary. We also have nurse call system with pull stations at every bed, each bath, and all common areas. Of course, it's all fire sprinkled the entire building. And we have an interactive system to prevent people from leaving the site. Fiscal impacts, again, the net fiscal impact at full build-out is about $140,000, and that's just for the assisted living facility. Because we don't know the user on the commercial site, we have not run those numbers, but you can anticipate that being much higher. Again, 40 full-time employees for the assisted living facility alone, and this analysis, again, does not include the 8,000 square foot building, which again will bump up that number as well. As staff had noted, we have proffered out some of the more intense uses. Again, those uses that would drive a lot of traffic: convenience stores, drive-through, fast food restaurants, car washes. To my disappointment, no microbreweries would be on this corner. But again, the intent.
That's your time, Mr. Payne.
Mr. Chairman, may I have just one more minute, and I will be completed.
We're not granting extra time this year, so.
Okay.
We're going to stick with our rules. Sorry, sir.
I'm happy to
I think we got it, though.
I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Board have any questions? Going to open up the public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The first speaker is James Carnath. Okay. Then signed up under public presentations, under the topic of Spring Arbor, is Clay Dickinson and Maynard, it looks like Curry?
Is anybody else here to speak on Spring Arbor public hearing? Is anybody here that did not sign up for the Spring Arbor 2 public hearing wish to speak? We'll close public hearing. What's that? And Mr. Curry, if you want yourself or your client to have any further conversation, you can.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since I ran out of time, I'm not going to go any further. But I appreciate your time. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions from the board? Do we have a motion?
I'd just like to thank you. You know, I've looked at this really closely. It looks like a good plan. It looks like the best use of the property, and it's taking care of our citizens too. So I'll motion to approve.
All right, we have a motion to approve by Mr. Ross. Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
Ms. Marshall.
Aye.
Dr. Trampy.
Aye.
And Chair, believe it or not, is aye.
Mr. Chairman, that brings us to R-17-0008, the Terry Industrial Park. It's located in the Berkeley District.
Mr. White, floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. May I have the floor computer, please? Thank you. I appreciate your patience. I have a quick PowerPoint and a few pre-written notes. This application is requesting the rezoning of a single parcel of land just under 2 acres from rural to industrial 2 with proffers to allow the I-2 zoned permitted and special uses. The applicant has proffered a GDP which identifies the expected future user of the property to be a heavy equipment and specialized vehicle sale, rental, or service establishment. The property proposed for the rezoning is within the primary development boundary and is identified for employment center development per the comp plan. Staff's recommending approval with proffers dated November 20th, 2017. The Planning Commission is also recommending approval of this case. A little additional history, on December 6th is when the Planning Commission recommended to approve. Prior to that, the item was tabled due to some traffic concerns and also some concerns related to the ultimate land use of the property. As a response to that, the applicant did include a new proffer related to tractor-trailer traffic to and from the site, and also proffered out uses, permitted and special uses in the I-2 zoning district, which are detailed in your report, and we can go over those at the end of this presentation if you'd like. The subject property is depicted in red before you. It's located approximately half of a mile south of the intersection of Route 1 and Massaponax Church Road. The site is also approximately 750 feet north of the intersection of Guinea Station Road with Route 1. This slide depicts the proffered GDP, which includes a 4,000 square foot office in the middle. At the rear of the property is an enclosed 34,000 square foot outdoor storage and display area. The green overlay on the slide depicts provided screening consisting of a street buffer E along the frontage, a half section of transitional screen 3 along the existing vacant property lines abutting to the northwest and southwest. Near the parking lot along the front of the site, you can also see that a proposed interparcel connection to both the southern and northern abutting properties. Closer to the front of the site, you can see a proposed sidewalk and a right-of-way dedication in accordance with the county's comprehensive transportation goals of the future widening of Route 1. You can also see a proposed 100-foot turn lane with a 200-foot taper. There was no traffic impact analysis required due to the low volume of trips. County traffic engineering used our own traffic modeling software and found that this segment of Route 1 is functioning at approximately at a level of service B during AM and PM peak travel periods. It's estimated that an increase of 134 vehicles per day could be generated by this user, and this segment of Route 1 is estimated to move approximately 13,000 vehicles a day. The applicant has applied for an access management exception waiver, which will be completed during the site plan review should this rezoning be approved. VDOT required the internal cross-access depicted on the GDP in support of the future waiver request from the applicant. As demonstrated on the GDP, the property has clear visibility over 500 feet in both directions. Staff reviewed this proposal in accordance with our comprehensive plan and found it generally consistent with land use, transportation, historic, and natural resources elements as detailed within your staff report. Staff also reviewed and supports the proffers of this case, including the condition to the GDP conformance requirement, the proffering out of multiple permitted and special uses of the I-2 zoning district, the proffered right-of-way dedication. As I noted earlier, the applicant has also proffered out to restrict tractor-trailer traffic to and from the property during the hours of 7 to 8 a.m. and 2 to 3 p.m. when county schools within 1 mile, and we're referring to Massaponax High, are open. Staff found the following in favor. The zoning designation of I-2 is consistent with the Employment Center land use designation. The proposed use would be compatible with the neighboring uses and the development pattern and within the development pattern of the general area. The rezoning is supportive of county business expansion goals, and it will increase the non-residential tax base of the county. The applicant worked with staff and redesigned their site at staff's request in order to pull the building forward and push the storage to the back. Staff found the following not in favor of the application. There's nothing preventing the development of this site from developing as proposed using the I-1 zoning district. There are other properties in the immediate area already zoned I-1, and the proposed use originally desired by the applicant is available as a permitted use in the I-1 district. Staff had encouraged the application to pursue this less intense I-1 designation. This was not agreed to by the applicant. Lastly, the property is in the Highway Corridor Overlay District, but the Highway Corridor Overlay District exempts out industrially zoned properties. There are no proffered building elevations, materials, or commitments to the structure's design, which introduces some uncertainty as to what the building will look like. Mitigating this is the applicant's proposed street buffer E, which is the densest street buffer requirement, or the densest street buffer available to the county. And is proposing to separate the structure from the street with this buffer. Staff's recommending approval with the proffers dated November 20th, 2017. I'll stand by for your questions, and I know the applicant has a presentation as well.
All right, any questions from the board? No. Applicant can come forward.
Mr. Chairman, other members of the Board of Supervisors, again, my name is Charlie Payne, the law from Hersher Fleischer, represent the applicant. We have our civil engineer here as well, Mark King from Bowman. The applicant's not here. He's a Prince William County fireman, so he was on duty tonight, so he couldn't make it. He said I could speak on his behalf so long as it didn't cost him any money. So we'll try to follow that rule. I do have a PowerPoint, and I will get through this timely, Mr. Chairman, I promise. As staff has noted, the property is almost 2 acres. It's located along Route 1 near the intersection of Guinea Station Road and Jefferson Davis Highway, just south of the Massachusetts Church intersection with Route 1. It's currently undeveloped, has been for some time. It's zoned RU. We're requesting an I2 zoning at that location. Again, the general concept is develop a 4,000 square foot office with fenced-in outdoor storage area. And the project should be complete within 12 to 18 months if this is approved. Located in this particular area around us to the south is a propane gas facility. We've got vacant land to our west and to our north. Used car lots is in the area, small engine repair. So you have some similar commercial uses and somewhat industrial uses in the immediate area. That particular area is planned employment centers, which does encourage industrial uses. Again, there are no existing residents in the immediate vicinity. There are no wetlands or cultural resource impacts on this site, which is good. We do believe this project is in conformance with the comprehensive plan, as staff had noted, and as I had stated earlier, it is within the employment center designation, which does encourage larger scale office complexes, industrial users, and business parks. Although this is a small site, we do believe that this is a viable proposed rezoning for the site. The project will improve Route 1 by adding about 4,200 square feet of right-of-way area, and will also have a taper turn lane into the property. It does obviously meet multiple goals, including that 730 mix being a purely industrial commercial use. Have no impact on schools, which is the good news, and the property is located within a primary development district, which means we can connect to public utilities. Here's the GDP of the site. You can see the taper with the right turn lane going south into the site. There's parking along the front there. You see the office and then the storage area in the back. And then you see the fencing around the site. I know at the Planning Commission level, there's some concern about us getting tractor trailers in there. I'm not sure you can get too many tractor trailers on that site. But again, this is not intended to be a heavy traffic user at this particular location. Again, transportation, it does abut Route 1. We'll access the property from Route 1, and we will construct road improvements along Route 1, which would be a benefit. And again, this is a low-intense use, proposed use, talking about 11 vehicles during PM, and 11 vehicles per day during AM, and about 12 on weekends. Again, we'll have minimal impact to fire and rescue. Again, no impact on schools, and Fire and Rescue Station 8 will serve this site. Proffers, you can see that we have proffered out about 28 more intense uses as part of this rezoning application is located in our proffer statement. Proffers, again, we're dedicating right-of-way, as stated earlier. We are going to have agreed to prohibit tractor trailers into the site between the hours of 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. and 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. Monday through Friday when school is in. The concern was schools in this particular area, if there's tractor trailers coming into the site, they didn't want them interceding with school buses. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
All right, does the board have any questions for the applicant? All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. We'll open up public hearing. Do we have any speakers signed up?
No, sir.
All right. Is anybody who did not sign up to speak for the Industrial Park, Terry Industrial Park, wish to speak? All right, close public hearing. Mr. Curry, do you want to speak any further? All right. Want to make a motion?
Make a motion to approve.
All right, Ms. Marshall has a motion to approve this project. Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Dr. Trampy.
Aye.
And chair's aye.
Thank you and good night.
Mr. Taylor.
Mr. Chairman, that does bring us to closed meeting.
Mr. Chair, this will be your resolution to adjourn into closed meeting. Whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors desires to adjourn into closed meeting for discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific public officers, appointees, or employees of any public body, specifically staff of the Department of Fire, Rescue, and Emergency Management. And whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors desires to adjourn into closed meeting for discussion concerning a prospective business or industry or the expansion of an existing business or industry where no previous announcement has been made of the businesses or industry's interest in locating or expanding its facilities in the community, specifically healthcare industry. And whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors desires to adjourn into closed meeting for consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel, specifically regarding board policies and procedures, matters of planning and zoning, and matters before the General Assembly. And whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors desires to adjourn into closed meeting for discussion of the award of a public contract involving the expenditure of public funds, including interviews of bidders or offerers, and discussion of the terms or scope of such contract where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body, specifically a contract for services. And whereas pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2, 3711A1, 5, 8, and 29, such discussions may occur in closed meeting. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors does hereby authorize discussion of the aforestated matters.
So moved. We got a motion from Dr. Trampy. Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall. Dr. Trampy.
Aye.
Chair, aye.
Meeting. Sorry, Mark. Whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors has convened a closed meeting on this day pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2, 3712D of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by this board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law, now therefore be it resolved that the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors hereby returns to open meeting and certifies by roll call vote that to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from the open meeting requirements of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act and identified in the motion to convene into closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed meeting.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Dr. Trampy.
Aye.
Chair's aye.
Mr. Chair, I would respectfully request a motion to add to the agenda the board's consideration of a resolution to reject House Bills 786 and House Bill 787.
So moved.
Got a motion by Mr. Yakubowski. Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Dr. Trampy.
Aye.
Chair, aye.
All right, this resolution sets forth that the board is against House Bill 786 and 787, which will remove the manifest error standard, which has been established by the Virginia courts, both before the Circuit Court and also before the Board of Equalization. And I submit it for your consideration. Amy, I'll give you a copy once you're done.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Mr. Yakubowski. Sorry, I didn't do this on any discussion. Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Nay.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Dr. Trampy.
Aye.
Chair's aye. That should be it, right?
Motion to adjourn,
Motion to
Mr.
adjourn.
Chairman.
So moved. We're all ayes.
See our work session Thursday at 6 p.m. And don't forget Valentine's Day, gentlemen, tomorrow.